Good evening, and welcome back to our exploration of mythology. Tonight, we journey into the captivating realm of Greek myths. As always, I'm eager to hear where you're joining us from around the globe, so get comfortable, settle in, and let's begin our tale. In the beginning, there was no Mount Olympus, no earth beneath our feet, no boundless sea, and no sheltering sky. Only chaos existed, but this chaos wasn't the kind of disorder we speak of today, not mere confusion or frenzy. It was something far more ancient, predating even language itself. Chaos was a limitless void, a yawning emptiness devoid of form or direction. It wasn't malevolent, nor benevolent, nor even indifferent. Simply was. From this primordial nothingness arose the first stirrings of existence. Gaia, the vast and unshakable earth. Tartarus, the dark and dreadful abyss lurking beneath the earth. And Eros, the force of love and desire, destined to become the binding agent of all future creation. These weren't gods in the way we understand them, not yet, but rather elemental truths taking shape. Then came Nyx, the night, draped in shadows so profound that even chaos itself seemed to recoil. She was followed by Erebus, the darkness of the underworld, who would dwell alongside her in that primeval silence. From the union of night and darkness emerged ether, the pure, upper air breathed by the gods, and Hera, the day, who from the very beginning was destined to eternally chase her mother across the heavens. Thus, the cycle of night and day was born, not through scientific principle, but through myth, through a family of strange, unseen titans who illuminated and dimmed the sky with each passing hour. Gaia, the earth herself, wasn't idle. Patient and fertile, she brought forth from her own being Uranus, the expansive, star-strewn sky. He was both her son and her consort. Yet, even Zeus, the king of gods, did not reign supreme without counsel. Surrounding him stood the other Olympians, each a vital pillar supporting the new world order. Hera, his wife, sat beside him, not merely as a consort but as a queen, wielding sovereign power in her own right. She was the goddess of marriage, queenship, and childbirth, embodying the silent, formidable wrath of a woman scorned. Proud and resolute, Hera held every slight in her memory, and her jealousy would one day shape the destinies of gods and mortals alike. Her crown was not a gift, but a hard-earned symbol, forged in the crucible of betrayal and bound by the sacred oaths of Olympus. Next was Dido, the goddess of grain and growth. Where her feet graced the earth, the soil softened, and seeds awakened. Her presence brought abundance and bountiful harvests, and without her blessing, fields lay barren. She preferred not to dwell solely amidst the thunder and marble of Olympus, but often walked among mortals, watching over the plowmen and mothers who whispered her name in reverence at dawn. Though older than many and quieter than most, her power was undeniable. Then there was Hestia, goddess of the hearth, the firstborn of Crones and Rhea, and the last to be freed from her father's belly. She sought no grand temples, no epic myths, no wars or lovers to define her. Instead, she tended the eternal flame at the heart of Olympus and watched over every home and hearth on earth. Her power was gentle yet ever-present, for as long as a fire burned in a household, Hestia resided there, too. In time, the younger gods arrived, some born on Olympus, others brought forth through extraordinary means. Athena was the first among them, born not of a womb but of pure wisdom. When Zeus, fearing that her unborn child would surpass him, swallowed Metis, he believed the threat was extinguished. However, Metis did not perish. She lived on within him, whispering, scheming, and crafting knowledge in the darkness. If Perseus was the first great hero, Heracles was the mightiest. His name, like thunder over distant mountains, carried weight across every land touched by Hellenic breath. He was not merely strong but larger than life itself, straddling the border between man and god, joy and grief, triumph and tragedy. He was the great-grandson of Perseus, a son of Argos, and a son of Zeus. And though the gods would bless him with strength, they would curse him with suffering. His birth was itself a trick of time. Zeus, ever lustful, desired Alcem, wife of the Theban general, Amphitryon. Disguised as her husband, the king of gods lay with her, extending a single night into threefold length. From that union came Heracles, and from Amphitryon a twin, Eiffels mortal and unbead. Hera, as always, watched from her throne with a cold and bitter eye. She knew her husband's ways, and she knew too well the threat that this child, half-god though he was, might one day pose to her own dominion. Even in the cradle, Heracles bore the mark of the divine. Hera, seeking to destroy him early, sent 2 serpents into the nursery to strangle the infant. But the child, with chubby hands reaching out, grasped them both by the throat, one in each fist, silencing any potential screams from the nurses. From that moment on, his legend began to take root. In his youth, he received instruction in all the arts considered suitable for a nobleman: music, archery, wrestling, and chariot racing. Yet, a wild streak persisted within him, an unyielding restlessness of spirit that no tutor or flatterer could ever fully subdue. Manhood brought him both profound love and utter devastation. He wed Megara, daughter of King Creon of Thebes, and for a time enjoyed domestic tranquility, fathering sons and steadfastly defending his city. But Hera harbored a long memory. In a burst of divine fury, she plunged Heracles' mind into the depths of madness. On the road, at a crossroads near Daulis, he encountered a stranger old, proud, and imperious. A quarrel erupted over the right-of-way, and in the heat of anger, Oedipus slew the man and his attendants, never realizing that he had just murdered his true father, Laius. He continued on to Thebes, which was then under siege, not by an army, but by the Sphinx, a monstrous creature with the body of a lion, the wings of an eagle, and the face of a woman. She devoured all who failed to answer her riddle. What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 in the evening? Oedipus answered without hesitation. Man, the Sphinx, defeated, threw herself from a cliff. Thebes rejoiced. The city's deliverer was made king, and in gratitude, he was given the widowed queen Jocasta, his own mother, as his bride. Years passed. Oedipus ruled well and fathered 4 children: Eteocles, Polynices, Antigone, and Ismene. But a plague fell upon Thebes, and the oracle proclaimed that the land was cursed by unpunished blood. Slowly, terribly, the truth unraveled. The old man at the crossroads, the queen's grief, the scarred feet, the servant who survived, and the blind prophet Tiresias, who named the king as both father and brother, son and husband. Jocasta, overwhelmed by the horror of it all, hanged herself. Oedipus, in an act of profound self-punishment, took her brooches and blinded himself, piercing his own eyes. He begged to be exiled and wandered the land as a wretched figure, guided. Destiny, however, would only allow Oedipus peace at the hand of Antigone. He found refuge in the hills near Colonus, and there, at long last, a quiet death came to him as the earth gently swallowed him whole, his grave a secret known only to the gods. Yet his children could not escape the family curse. Upon Mount Olympus, the gods forged a new order, one no less severe than its predecessor, but undeniably more intricate and profoundly intertwined with the destinies of mortals. Zeus, wielding his ever-ready thunderbolt, reigned from his golden throne, his pronouncements carrying weight among both gods and humankind. Yet, his dominion wasn't solely reliant on brute force. He was a shrewd king, adept at cultivating alliances, rewarding loyalty, and punishing betrayal. He divided the cosmos amongst his brothers, the sky for himself, the seas for Poseidon, and the shadowy underworld for Hades, establishing a precarious equilibrium with Earth and Olympus. Around him, the new pantheon crystallized. Hera, both his sister and queen, presided over marriage and childbirth, though her days were often consumed by jealousy and suspicion, as Zeus was notoriously unfaithful. His countless liaisons with goddesses, nymphs, and mortal women bore a multitude of offspring who would profoundly impact the world. Heracles, Perseus, Helen, Minos, and countless others. Hera, ever vigilant, relentlessly punished his lovers and their children with a cold and enduring wrath. Beside them stood Athena, born not from a womb but springing forth, fully formed and armored, from Zeus's very skull, the goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare. She favored mortals who prioritized intellect over brute strength, particularly Odysseus, and guided cities such as Athens to thrive under the principles of law and reason. In contrast to Ares, who reveled in carnage, Athena's approach to warfare was disciplined and precise. Her presence marked the Olympian era as a time defined by intellect as much as strength. Apollo and Artemis, the twin children of Leto, brought both light and shadow in equal measure. Apollo, with his golden hair and radiant aura, governed prophecy, music, and healing. Upon entry, the souls were met by Cerberus, the three-headed hound who kept the dead in and the living out. Beyond him stretched the plains of Asphodel, gray and dim, where most souls drifted in forgetful silence, murmuring like dry leaves. But not all fates were equal. The underworld had its judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, who weighed each soul. The truly wicked were cast into Tartarus, a chasm of torment deeper than even the Titan's prison, where oathbreakers, murderers, and traitors suffered torments crafted to mirror their crimes. Sisyphus rolled his stone, Tantalus thirsted forever beside unreachable water, and Ixion spun upon his fiery wheel. The rare few deemed worthy of reward passed to the Elysian fields, a paradise of soft winds, green meadows, and perpetual spring. There, heroes might linger in comfort, their memories intact, their deeds honored. Still fewer souls might choose to be reborn, passing through the river Lethe to forget their past lives, beginning the cycle anew. In later mystery religions, a soul might even hope to escape the wheel entirely and ascend to the stars, but such fates were rare and uncertain. At the heart of this realm stood Hades, stern and silent, a king without vanity. He did not seek worship, did not interfere in the affairs of mortals. He simply ruled, and he ruled absolutely. His realm did not change, and he preferred it that way. He was not evil, as later myths would paint him, but immovable, indifferent, the shadow cast by Zeus's storm and Poseidon's tide. And by his side stood Persephone, queen of the underworld, whose story, perhaps more than any other, reveals the strange duality of death in Greek thought. Persephone was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest. One spring day, as she gathered flowers, the earth split open and Hades rose in his chariot. He took her swiftly and without consent down into his realm. Demeter, in her grief, let the earth wither. And when he arched above her, stretching across the heavens, the world acquired its first form, a domed sky resting upon a broad and endless plain. Gaia also birthed the towering and untamed mountains, and Pontus, the sea, surging with a will of its own long before ships or sea monsters ever disturbed its waters. Together, earth and sky became the first great pair, and their union gave rise to the Titans, the first generation of powerful beings who would rule the cosmos long before Zeus and his Olympian kin ascended to power. There were 12 Titans in all, 6 sons and 6 daughters, each vast and elemental in their own right. Oceanus, the river that encircled the world. Hyperion, the lord of light. Ceus, the inquisitive one. Crius, the bearer of constellations. Iapetus, the ancestor of humankind. And Cronus, the youngest and most cunning. Among the daughters were Thea, the shining mother of the sun and moon. Rhea, the future mother of gods. Themis, the embodiment of divine law. Mnemosyne, the keeper of memory. Phoebe, the radiant one. And Tethys, the nourisher of the sea. But Gaia's womb wasn't finished with them. She also bore monstrous children, beings of immense strength and dread. First came the Cyclopes, Brontes, Steripes, and Argesh, each with a single eye blazing like a forge in the center of their forehead. They were the smiths of lightning, strong and simple, and they feared neither god nor giant. Then came the Centimanes, the 100-handed ones, each enormous and terrifying to behold, with 50 heads and 100 arms, capable of shaking the very foundations of the world when enraged. Uranus, though lord of the sky, trembled at the sight of these monstrous offspring. Ashamed and frightened by their grotesque strength, He forced them back into Gaia's womb, into the depths of the earth itself, and sealed them away beneath layers of rock and grief. Gaia groaned under their weight. One day, Zeus cried out in unbearable agony. With a mighty blow to his skull, Athena sprang forth, fully grown and clad in bronze armor, spear in hand, her eyes clear and sharp as flint. She became the goddess of wisdom, strategy, and just war, a virgin warrior with no patience for frivolity. Apollo and Artemis followed, twins born of Leto, a Titaness who wandered long and wearily in search of a place to give birth. No land dared offer her sanctuary, for Hera's wrath was immense and vengeful. At last, the floating island of Delos accepted her, and there she bore her children. Apollo, golden-haired and radiant, became the god of light, prophecy, music, and healing. His sister, Artemis, swift and silver, was the goddess of the hunt, of wild creatures and the moonlit night. Together, they represented a new generation of gods, restless, vibrant, and deeply connected to the mortal realm. Then came Ares, god of war and slaughter, son of Zeus and Hera, though favored by neither. He was strength without discipline, rage without cause, and though his name inspired fear, he was rarely honored. War followed him like a shadow, and he reveled in its chaos, yet he was often outmatched by cunning and wisdom. His opposite was Histus, the lame god of the forge, master of craft and flame. Whether born of Hera alone or cast down from Olympus by Zeus, both tales were told. He found solace in metal, crafting wonders with hammer and fire. From his hands came armor, palaces, and automatons. Though limping and twisted, he was among the most indispensable of the gods. Aphrodite, goddess of beauty and desire, did not arrive through birth but through foam, born from Uranus's severed flesh cast into the sea. She emerged from the surf at Cyprus, as beautiful as she was dangerous. Love, lust, jealousy, and ruin followed in her wake. Even Zeus could not fully command her. Blinded by rage, he stormed through his own halls and slaughtered his wife and children with the very hands that had once cradled them. As the madness receded and his vision cleared, he was confronted with the carnage and ruin of his own making. His anguished cries echoed all the way to Olympus, yet no god offered solace. Seeking atonement, he sought out the oracle at Delphi. The Pythia, speaking in cryptic riddles, decreed that he must submit to the will of Eurystheus, king of Tiryns, his cousin, lesser in strength but favored by fate. Only through servitude and suffering could Heracles find redemption. Thus began the 12 labors, feats so immense and terrifying that even the gods took notice. The first labor demanded he slay the Nemean lion, a fearsome beast whose golden hide was impervious to mortal weapons. Heracles tracked it to its den and strangled it with his bare hands. Using the lion's own claw, he skinned the beast and thereafter wore the pelt as armor, a second hide to protect him from the world. The second labor pitted him against the Lernaean Hydra, a serpentine monster with 9 heads, 2 of which regrew for every one severed. Heracles battled it in the murky swamps, aided by his nephew, Iolaus, who cauterized the severed stumps to prevent regrowth. From the Hydra's last, immortal, and venomous head, Heracles extracted its ichor and dipped his arrows in it, rendering them deadly, even to gods. The third labor required the capture of the Ceryneian hind, a deer with golden antlers sacred to Artemis. Heracles pursued it relentlessly for a year across hills and rivers before finally capturing it alive with great care, earning the reluctant approval of the goddess. The fourth labor brought him face to face with the Erymanthian boar, a monstrous beast that roamed the wild. He wrestled it in the snow-covered heights of Arcadia and dragged it back to Tiryns in chains, delighting as Eurystheus cowered in terror inside a bronze jar. Eteocles and Polynices battled fiercely for the throne, and when Polynices was exiled, he rallied an army from Argos, leading the 7 against Thebes in a war that drenched the city in blood. The brothers met in single combat at the city gates, where each dealt the other a fatal blow. Thebes survived, but its spirit was broken. Antigone, the last vestige of the family's honor, defied royal decree and buried her brother, an act for which her uncle Creon condemned her to be buried alive. As punishment, the gods unleashed madness and death upon his house. Thebes endured, but its kingship became a revolving door of ruin. The tale of Oedipus is not one of monsters slain or cities built. It is a tragedy of fate, a demonstration of how a man, despite his best efforts to evade prophecy, can unwittingly run directly into its grasp. It is a tragedy born not of inherent evil, but of ignorance, of a man who relentlessly sought the truth and was ultimately destroyed by it. The house of Thebes, for all its glory, was built upon the bones of serpents and riddles, and no riddle, no matter how cleverly solved, can alter the will of the gods. Of all the wars to ever scar mortal lands, none would echo as loudly as that fought for a woman's face. A war fueled by oaths and pride, beauty and betrayal, gods and kings, and the fall of empires. Its spark was not a spear or a flame, but a wedding, one to which all the gods were invited, save for one, Eris, the goddess of discord. She was deemed unwelcome at the marriage of Peleus and Thetis, the sea nymph destined to bear a son greater than his father. In her wrath, Eris tossed a golden apple into the midst of the feast, inscribed with 3 words that held the power to shatter kingdoms. To the fairest, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite each claimed the apple, each convinced of her own superior beauty. He held dominion over the oracle at Delphi, conveying cryptic pronouncements through the Pythia, influencing the fates of kings and battles with a few enigmatic words. Yet, he was also capable of unleashing plagues, as he did upon the Achaeans at Troy. Artemis, his sister, roamed the forests, untouched by men, a huntress and protector of the wild. She neither sought permission nor offered forgiveness to those who trespassed upon her sacred groves. Demeter, goddess of the harvest, maintained the earth's fertility, except during the time her daughter, Persephone, was abducted by Hades. In her grief, Demeter allowed the crops to wither, and from her sorrow, the seasons were born. Her myth reverberated through every field, every cold winter, and every warm spring, a cyclical tale of mourning and renewal. Aphrodite, some say, arose from the sea foam where Uranus's severed flesh had fallen, and she ruled over love and desire. Her beauty drove both gods and mortals to distraction. She bound men's hearts to both ruin and pleasure. In the halls of Olympus, she was wed to Hephaestus, the lame smith god, but she gave her heart and body to Ares, the god of war. Together, they embodied the tumultuous nature of passion and conflict. Hermes, fleet-footed son of Zeus, traversed the realms as messenger, thief, and guide of souls. He was the god of boundaries, both keeper and violator of them. No door remained closed to Hermes. He moved freely from Olympus to Hades, from feasts to battlefields, a perpetual smile gracing his lips. This new pantheon did not rule in silence. The Olympians were not remote creators, but imminent, meddling, playing favorites, and waging subtle wars through the hands of mortals. Unlike the Titans, who embodied elemental forces, the Olympians were reflections of human nature, amplified to a divine scale. Their loves were messy, their grudges eternal, and their pride immense. They aided and hindered as whim dictated. Crops failed, rivers dried, famine swept across the land. No prayer could sway her. She would not let the world grow green again until her daughter was returned. At last, Zeus sent Hermes to retrieve Persephone, but because she had eaten pomegranate seeds, 6 of them or perhaps just 1, she was bound to Hades. The compromise became a myth for the seasons. Persephone would spend part of the year in the underworld, and during those months Demeter would grieve and the world would grow cold. When Persephone returned, the earth would bloom. Life and death became a cycle, not a sentence. Over time, Persephone's role evolved. No longer merely a captive, she became a ruler in her. Hades' queen, Persephone, was a figure of mystery, moving with a quiet power in the realm of shadows. At Eleusis, outside Athens, the sacred rites reenacted her descent and return annually, promising not just the revival of the grain but also spiritual renewal. The underworld wasn't impenetrable. Some mortals journeyed there and returned to tell their tales. Orpheus, with his song, bypassed Cerberus and charmed Hades and Persephone, only to lose Eurydice with a single fatal glance. Heracles brought Cerberus into the light of day. Odysseus, guided by Circe, made sacrifices to summon the shades of Tiresias, Achilles, and Agamemnon, each confirming death's grim finality. Achilles, once the greatest of the Greeks, declared it better to be a slave in life than a king among the dead. Thus, the Greeks meticulously built their tombs, burying the deceased with coins for Charon, along with weapons, wine, and songs. Libations were poured, and offerings made at the family hearth, for the dead were never truly gone. They lingered in dreams, sent omens, and sometimes, through rituals and blood, could be summoned for answers best left unspoken. The underworld mirrored life, a realm of memory and inescapable justice. The earth, once proud and nurturing, now suffered with every breath. It was in this pain that she began to plot. But that is a story for another day. For now, remember this. In the earliest age, before law or justice, before sword or plow, the world was made not with hands, but with force, union, and grief. Chaos birthed the first forms, but it was Gaia, the great mother, who gave them ground to stand upon. The union of Gaia and Uranus, earth and sky, was the first great marriage of the cosmos. It wasn't a marriage of altars or witnesses, but of necessity and nature. The sky stretched over the earth, holding her tightly, pressing her beneath his star-studded body night after night. From their joining came the Titans and other mighty offspring, but also a deep and growing sorrow. For Uranus, though proud and vast, was a jealous and fearful father. He saw in the monstrous children Gaia bore not strength, but a threat to his dominion. He looked upon the Cyclopes and the hundred-handed giants with revulsion, not wonder, and with swift, cruel judgment. He thrust them back into Gaia's womb, deep into the belly of the earth, where no light reached and no voice could echo. Gaia groaned beneath their weight. It was not only the agony of bearing them within her again, but the betrayal of her consort, of Sky, who should have cherished their children as she did. Night after night, Uranus descended upon her, pressing down the heavens to meet the earth, blind to her pain and deaf to her grief. She could endure no longer, and so, from her own flesh, she fashioned a weapon not of bronze or iron, for such things had not yet been dreamed, but a great sickle of unyielding flint, jagged as truth and sharp as vengeance. Then she went to her Titan sons, the firstborn and mightiest among her children, and laid bare her suffering. "Your father has wronged me," she said. "He has caged your brothers. He has silenced the womb that bore you. Who among you will aid me?" She ensnared gods and mortals alike with a single glance, and though she smiled often, her smiles were never without consequence. Hermes, the trickster and herald, was the last of this early court to arrive, son of Zeus and the nymph Maia. He moved swiftly between worlds, winged sandals at his feet and a mischievous grin on his lips. He stole Apollo's cattle on the day of his birth, sang a song to conceal the theft, and made himself indispensable before he could even walk. He became the messenger of the gods, the guide of souls, and the patron of thieves and travelers. Where Hermes went, boundaries blurred. This was the Olympian court, a gathering not of saints but of raw, flawed, radiant, and immense powers. They quarreled as siblings do, took sides in mortal affairs, fell in love, betrayed each other, waged petty rivalries, and enacted divine justice. But above all, they ruled from Olympus, watching the world below and shaping it to their will. The age of Titans had passed, but in its place came an era of stories, of gods who walked among men, of heroes born from their unions, and of a world forever transformed by the hands of the divine. The world now had its rulers, but peace, as ever, was a fragile thing, and fate had not yet spoken its final word. Long before humans raised cities of marble or carved their prayers into stone, there were no humans upon the earth. The gods ruled alone, their courts high upon Olympus, their domains vast and varied. The world beneath them was green and wild, teeming with beasts and silent mountains, but there were no hands to till the soil, no voices to sing to the stars, no fire to warm the night. It was Prometheus, a titan of the old blood, who first conceived of the shape of man. He was no friend to cronies, nor was he counted among those chained in Tartarus. The fifth task was decidedly less glamorous, cleaning the Augean stables, home to thousands of cattle whose manure had accumulated for decades. Heracles, ever resourceful, diverted 2 rivers to wash away the filth in a single day. The sixth labor involved driving away the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with bronze beaks and razor-sharp feathers. With the help of a rattle provided by Athena, he startled them into flight and shot them down from the sky. The seventh labor led him far to the west to capture the Cretan bull, a creature of divine origin that had sired the Minotaur. Heracles wrestled it into submission and brought it back alive, the bull's eyes burning with a mixture of madness and sea salt fury. The eighth labor sent him north to Thrace, where he tamed the mares of Diomedes, flesh-eating horses with a craving for human meat. He fed Diomedes, their master, to them, and the beasts became docile. The ninth labor demanded both diplomacy and bloodshed. Heracles was tasked with retrieving the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons. Though the queen initially agreed to gift it willingly, Hera sowed discord among the warrior women, and a fierce battle erupted. Heracles slew Hippolyta and escaped with the belt. The 10th labor took him to the edge of the known world, to Erythea, where he stole the cattle of Geryon, a triple-bodied giant. He erected the pillars of Heracles at the Strait of Gibraltar and battled the giant, his herdsmen, and his fearsome hound all at once before driving the red cattle back across continents. But Eurystheus, seeking to diminish his achievements, declared 2 of the labors invalid, claiming Iolaus had aided him with the Hydra and the rivers with the stables. 2 more were required. The 11th labor was to steal the golden apples of the Hesperides, guarded by nymphs and a dragon coiled around the tree's base. To resolve the dispute, they turned to a mortal shepherd prince, Paris, son of King Priam of Troy, who had been exiled to the hills after an omen foretold he would one day bring ruin to his birthplace. The gods brought him to Mount Ida for judgment, and one by one they offered him bribes. Hera promised him kingship over all men. Athena pledged wisdom and victory in war, but Aphrodite, with a smile as soft as summer thunder, offered him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose love, and thus Helen of Sparta, daughter of Zeus and wife of Menelaus, was marked. In her youth, Helen had drawn countless suitors, princes and kings from across Achaea, drawn not only by her beauty but by the allure of bloodlines that stretched back to Olympus itself. Her mortal father, King Tyndareus, fearing the war that her hand would ignite, sought the counsel of Odysseus. On his advice, Tyndareus bound all the suitors by a sacred oath. Whoever won Helen's hand, all others would swear to defend that union and to punish any who dared to violate it. The pact was sealed with laughter, but oaths, once made, bind more than men. They bind fate itself. Menelaus, brother to King Agamemnon of Mycenae, won her hand. Their rule in Sparta was just their kingdom strong. But when Paris arrived as a guest, ostensibly to broker peace, he saw Helen and recognized in her the prize Aphrodite had promised. Whether she went willingly or was abducted remains a subject of songs and shadows, debated by poets through the ages. But when Paris sailed back across the Aegean, Helen was with him, and in that moment the war began. Menelaus was consumed by rage. He invoked the oath, and all who had sworn it answered his call. Odysseus of Ithaca, clever and reluctant. Nestor, the aged sage of Pylos. Ajax the greater, son of Telamon, towering and grim. Ajax the lesser, swift and fierce. Diomedes of Argos, brave and hungry for battle. Idomeneus of Crete, steadfast and strong. Cities were founded in their honor. Sacrifices burned for their favor. Oracles spoke their will. And every home maintained a flame for Hestia, goddess of the hearth, who asked for little and offered peace in return. Yet, beneath all their grandeur lay a constant truth. Their power, though vast, was not absolute. They could be bound by oaths, deceived by mortals, and undone by time. Even Zeus, in all his glory, was haunted by the same fear that had doomed his father. that one day a child of his would rise to overthrow him. His union with Thetis was abandoned for this very reason. Instead, she was wed to the mortal Peleus, ensuring that their son, Achilles, would die young and not pose a threat. In this, the Olympians were no different from men. They feared loss, clung to their thrones, and fought to preserve their order. But for a time, they reigned supreme, their names etched into every marble temple, their deeds sung in every ballad, their symbols carved into shields and coins. The age of heroes had waned, but the gods still held dominion over the world of men. And yet, from distant lands and whispered prophecies came the faintest echo of change. New gods stirred beyond the horizon. The temples would not remain full forever, but for now Olympus stood tall. The Olympians were mighty, but not unchallenged. Even as temples to Zeus reached towards the sky and Athena's wisdom enlightened the minds of city-states, darker gods walked the earth. Gods of wine and madness, of death and rebirth, of things not carved into public altars but whispered in secret groves and torchlit caves. Chief among them was Dionysus, the last to take his seat on Olympus, and the only one who truly bridged the gap between the divine and the wild. Dionysus was no ordinary god. His very birth defied the laws of nature and propriety. He was the son of Zeus and Semele, a mortal princess of Thebes. It offered no heaven for the virtuous, nor hell for the wicked, simply existing as a vast, dark domain ruled by a god who desired not love or prayers, but silence. In that stillness, the Greeks perceived eternity. And in the stories of Hades and Persephone, of shadows and judgment, of rivers and thrones beneath the earth, they gave death its place in the cosmic order, not as punishment, but as a transition. Even the gods are not immortal, not in memory, power, or reverence. Every mythic cycle reaches a point where the divine fades, vivid figures receding from human dreams, and thunder-forged thrones wearing smooth with time. For the Olympian gods, this slow decline began not with war or prophecy, but with Rome and a world grown weary of old narratives. The Romans didn't destroy the Greek gods. They adopted them, renaming them and integrating their myths into Roman values and imperial ambitions. Zeus became Jupiter, Hera became Juno, Poseidon became Neptune, and so on. This transformation was both calculated and reverent. Rome admired Olympus' grandeur but reshaped the gods to better reflect its ideals of order, hierarchy, and empire. Jupiter thundered not from a wild peak but from the Capitoline hill, robed as a lawgiver. Dionysus' wildness became the cultivated Bacchus, and Athena's fierce independence softened into Minerva's civic wisdom. In literature, the myths persisted. Ovid, in his Metamorphoses, retold the old stories in elegant Latin, often with irony and always with poetic grace. Virgil, in the Aeneid, cast the gods as instruments of fate, pulling the strings behind Rome's founding. But a shift had occurred since Homer's time, where the gods once strode battlefields, naked in their passions, visible in the dust and blood. In Roman myth they became symbolic, distant, politicized, intervening less freely. They evolved into themes more than presences. As the empire expanded, so did its encounters with new deities and ideologies. One by one, they turned away, fearful of their father's might. Only Cronus, the youngest, the shrewdest, the one with watchful eyes and a patient heart, stepped forward. "I will do it," he said. "Give me the blade." So Gaia set the trap. She waited for Uranus to descend as he always did, laying himself across her in the dark. And from the shadows Cronus sprang. With a steady hand and no hesitation, he brought the sickle down upon his father. The sky shook with Uranus's cry as the blade bit deep, severing the source of his power. Cronus cast the bloodied flesh into the sea, and from the crimson foam that rose upon the waves, something new was born, a figure of impossible beauty, terrible and irresistible in equal measure. From that white froth came Aphrodite, goddess of love and desire, who would later cause kings to fall and empires to burn. She stepped ashore at Cyprus, radiant and serene, untouched by the violence of her origin. But Gaia's vengeance did not end with blood. From the droplets that fell upon the earth sprang other beings. The Furies, cloaked in shadow and vengeance, who would haunt oathbreakers and kinslayers until the end of days, the giants, who in time would rise up against the gods themselves, and the mealy nymphs of the ash trees, guardians of the wild and the old ways. Uranus, wounded and dethroned, vanished into the heavens, leaving the world to his children. Before he fled, it is said he spoke a final curse, one that would ring through time like a bell. Just as I was overthrown by my son, so too shall he be overthrown by his own. It was not a prophecy he invented, but a truth Gaia had already whispered, and Cronus heard it well. He took the sky throne and wrapped himself in power. But from the moment he grasped it, he began to fear what his father had warned. Thus ended the reign of Uranus, the first king of the cosmos, and began the age of the Titans. Yet already in the womb of time, the next storm was stirring. During the war of the Titans, Prometheus had sided with Zeus, not out of love or loyalty, but out of foresight, for he possessed the gift of prophecy and knew which way the storm would break. Prometheus's name meant forethought, and it suited him well. He was brother to Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, and never were a pair of brothers more different. Where Epimetheus acted in haste and repented at leisure, Prometheus saw farther, thought longer, and questioned the justice of every decree, even those issued by the king of the gods himself. He walked the line between Titan and Olympian, old world and new, a creature of reason in a cosmos ruled by passion and power. It was he who first shaped mankind. Some say he sculpted them from clay beside the banks of a river, his fingers smoothing mud into limbs, his breath giving them life. Others claim he molded them in the image of the gods, upright and thoughtful, gifted with the spark of invention. However it happened, the first men were made, and they were weak, soft-skinned, slow-footed, clawless, fangless, and lacking both fur and fire. They were naked beneath the sky, shivering in winter, defenseless against the beasts of the world. Prometheus looked upon them and pitied them. He went to Olympus and asked that man be given a gift, something to help them survive, something to elevate them above the level of animals. But Zeus refused. He saw in mortals not promise but peril. The god-king had only just seized his throne and was wary of new forces rising beneath him. "Let them live," he said, "but let them fear. Let them know their place beneath the gods. Fire," he declared, "is the privilege of immortals, the hearth flame of Hestia, the thunderbolt of Zeus, the forge of Hystes. These are not for mortal hands." But Prometheus, stubborn and righteous, did not yield. In secret, he climbed to the heavens, stole a flame from the forge of Hephaestus, and hid it in a hollow fennel stalk. Heracles tricked Atlas, the Titan burdened with holding up the sky, into retrieving the apples while he temporarily bore the heavens on his shoulders. When Atlas attempted to abandon his burden, Heracles feigned the need to adjust his cloak and tricked Atlas into taking back the sky, allowing Heracles to flee with the precious fruit. The 12th and final labor was the most harrowing: to descend into the underworld itself and bring back Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades. Armed with nothing but his brute strength and courage, Heracles journeyed to the realm of the dead, presented himself before Hades, and with the gods' grudging permission, wrestled Cerberus into submission, leading the snarling and frothing beast into the land of the living. With that final labor, his redemption was complete. Yet, even with his labors fulfilled, Heracles' life remained far from peaceful. He engaged in more battles, took new wives, and fathered numerous children. But Hera's animosity never faded. In the end, it was not a blade or a monstrous beast that brought about his demise, but the poisoned blood of the centaur Nessus, smeared upon a tunic gifted by his wife, Deianira, who mistakenly believed it to be a love charm. As the poison coursed through his veins, burning his flesh, Heracles built his own funeral pyre atop Mount Ida. No mortal dared to light it until Philoctetes, a simple shepherd, bravely stepped forward. For this act of courage, he was gifted with Heracles' legendary bow. Heracles was consumed by the flames, but in death he was reborn. Zeus raised him to Olympus, granting him immortality and marriage to Hebe, the goddess of youth. He became not merely a hero, but a god. His labors, born of grief and guilt, became the very standard by which heroism was measured. While others were remembered in stories, Heracles was honored in shrines, in athletic games, and in the hearts of mortals who dared to dream of achieving greatness. From every corner of Hellas they came, kings, princes, and warlords. Only two held back: Odysseus, who feigned madness, sowing salt into his fields until a clever envoy placed his infant son before the plow, and Achilles, son of Thetis, whom his mother concealed among the daughters of Lycomedes, dressed in silk to escape the fate she foresaw. But the Greeks found him. Odysseus, again, tricked Achilles with a spear and shield hidden amid gifts of jewelry, and the boy chose war. They gathered at Aulis, a fleet of 1,000 ships, bronze gleaming and sails billowing like thunderclouds, but the winds refused to rise. The ships sat idle, and the men grew restless. The seer Calchas revealed that Artemis had been offended, perhaps by a boast, perhaps by a slain stag, and that only a great sacrifice would appease her. The name he spoke was Iphigenia, daughter of Agamemnon. There are tales of lies told to lure her to Aulis under the pretense of marriage to Achilles, of her weeping mother, Clytemnestra, of the moment the blade fell, or of a last-minute rescue, with Artemis spiriting the girl away and replacing her with a deer. But in most tellings, the blood was real, and the gods watched as the king killed his own child for the sake of war. The winds then rose, and the fleet sailed east, forever changing the world. The Greeks landed on Trojan shores, not as mere raiders, but as an instrument of divine judgment. For 10 years, they would camp beneath the walls of Ilium, the great city ruled by Priam and defended by his sons. Hector, noble and doomed; Paris, beautiful and weak; Deiphobus, Helenus, and others. The gods chose sides. Hera, Athena, and Poseidon stood with the Greeks. Aphrodite, Ares, Apollo, and Artemis favored the Trojans. Only Zeus attempted to remain neutral, but even he would yield, swayed by fate and family. When Semele, tricked by Hera, demanded that Zeus reveal his true divine form, she was consumed by his thunderous radiance. Yet, from her ashes, Zeus plucked the unborn child and sewed him into his own thigh. Months later, Dionysus was born again, twice born, they would call him, and from that moment on, his path diverged from that of the other Olympians. He was raised not on Olympus, but in far-flung corners of the world, among nymphs in Nyssa, in the caves of India, in the company of satyrs and maenads. He wandered, not ruling from a throne, but roaming with flute and vine, his train of revelers trailing behind in ecstatic dance. Where he walked, vineyards bloomed and reason faltered. He was not merely the god of wine, but of altered states, of the delicate, sacred boundary between civilization and chaos, between ecstasy and insanity. He inspired joy, yes, but also frenzy, and in that frenzy men and women alike might forget who they were. His arrival in Greece was met with resistance. Cities mocked his rites, and kings barred his worship. One by one, he punished them. In Thebes, his mother's homeland, the young god returned in disguise, his followers stirring unrest with drums and cries. Pentheus, the rigid king, sought to suppress the madness. He arrested Dionysus, scoffed at the wild rites, and sought to spy on the women in the hills. But the god lured him into the woods dressed as a woman. And there, in a trance of divine madness, his own mother, Agave, led the maenads in tearing him limb from limb. Only when she returned to the city with her son's head on a thyrsus did the spell break, and the lesson settle like a shadow over all of Thebes. Dionysus was the god of theater as well as intoxication, of masks and performance, of truths hidden within lies. His festivals became the heart of Greek drama, where comedies and tragedies alike were performed in his honor. Through masks and songs, the Greeks gave shape to fears and desires they dared not speak aloud. From the east came Mithras, born from stone and slayer of cosmic bulls. From Egypt came Isis, a mother of magic and life, veiled in silks and secrets. From Judea came a single, invisible god, one who forbade images, scorned idols, and allowed no divine siblings or thunder-wielding kings. These new cults didn't just rival the Olympians. They undermined the very foundation of Greek belief, where gods ruled by appetite and hierarchy. These new faiths offered moral clarity, unity, and salvation. Simultaneously, philosophy began to erode the mythic world from within. Thinkers like Xenophanes had long ridiculed the notion of gods shaped in man's image, arguing that if oxen had gods, they, too, would look bovine. Plato admired myth's beauty but questioned its literal truth, suggesting the gods must be perfect and good, not the jealous, lustful figures bickering on Olympus. Epicurus declared that the gods existed but took no interest in human affairs, and that fear of divine punishment was a superstition to be discarded. Even Stoicism, with its strict ethical code, located divinity not in figures but in reason itself, the logos that governed all. By the rise of the imperial cult, when emperors were deified and altars erected to mortal men, the line between myth and politics had blurred completely. The old gods became symbols. Their temples maintained more for tradition than belief. Farmers might still leave offerings to Demeter, and sailors still pray to Poseidon, but fewer truly believed the gods walked among them. The flame on Olympus hadn't yet extinguished, but it flickered weakly. Then came the final blow, not from a rival cult, but from a revolution of faith. Christianity, once a fringe sect of persecuted believers, spread across the empire, carried not by the sword, but by the word. As God was unseen, singular, and omnipotent, its stories were not of lovers and vengeance, but of sin and salvation. With Uranus cast down and the sky no longer pressed so tightly upon the earth, the world breathed anew. The Titans, freed from their father's yoke, now stood tall beneath the heavens, and Cronus, the youngest and most cunning among them, claimed dominion over all. He was not a god of chaos or cruelty, as his father had been in the end, but he ruled with a cautious and suspicious heart. The sickle he had used to bring down Uranus remained hidden, buried in the earth or cast into the sea, its blade remembered but unseen, like a secret sin. Cronus had delivered his mother from torment and his siblings from imprisonment. Yet from the very moment he sat upon the throne of the cosmos, his mind was troubled by the prophecy that had driven him to rebellion. The words of his dying father echoed through him like a second heartbeat, that he too would be cast down by his own child. So Cronus took a wife as kings must. He chose Rhea, his sister, a Titaness of gentle strength and deep wisdom, though her name would one day be spoken in the same breath as pain. Together, they ruled through a time that later poets would remember as a golden age, a time when mortals, newly created, lived in peace, free from suffering, untouched by winter or war, and the fruits of the earth ripened without need for toil. It was an age before kings had armies, before men built walls or worshipped temples, when justice moved unseen among humankind and no one locked their doors. But such peace, as the world has always known, does not last. In time, Rhea began to bear children, and as each was born, Cronus remembered his father's curse. He did not hesitate. The moment Rhea placed each newborn in his arms, first Hestia, then Demeter, then Hera, Hades, and Poseidon, he opened wide his jaws and swallowed them whole. Not a trace was left, not a cry, not a cradle, only the knowledge that they were gone, hidden within their father's belly like seeds in winter soil. Carrying it down from Olympus, he gave it to man. For the first time, fire crackled beneath the stars. Smoke rose in spirals above the treetops. Light pushed back the darkness. With fire came warmth, safety, cooking, metal, language, and craft. Humanity, once cold and voiceless, began to build. And with fire came defiance, too. Zeus was not long in discovering the theft, and his fury was terrible. To punish mankind, he commissioned the gods to create a gift, though it was a curse in disguise. Hephaestus shaped her from clay, a woman of perfect beauty. Aphrodite gave her charm, Hermes gave her cunning, and Athena clothed her in silver raiment. Her name was Pandora, meaning all gifted, and she was given a sealed jar, mistranslated in later ages as a box, containing the sorrows of the world. Disease, toil, grief, madness, envy, and death itself. Epimetheus, ever the fool, took her into his home despite Prometheus's warnings. And when Pandora, driven by curiosity, the final gift of the gods, opened the jar, the evil spilled out into the world like smoke from a fire too long confined. Mankind, who had known peace in their brief golden youth, now found themselves hunted by fate. Hunger gnawed at their bellies. War bled them dry. Age stooped their backs. Only hope remained inside the jar. Some say by accident, others say by design, a flickering light amid the gloom. But Prometheus's punishment had not yet come. For the crime of defying Olympus, Zeus ordered him chained to a mountain at the edge of the world. Some say the Caucasus, others say a place lost to myth. There he was bound in adamantine chains, unbreakable and eternal. Each day an eagle, born of Typhon or sent by Zeus, would descend and feast upon his liver. Each night it would grow back, and each morning the torment would begin again. He was immortal, and so the suffering could not kill him. He endured it for generations, long after kingdoms rose and fell, long after men forgot the gods who made them. If Heracles was the epitome of Greek heroism, then Theseus was its most cunning and politically astute embodiment, possessing a more relatable humanity. He was not merely a slayer of monsters or a vanquisher of curses. He was a city builder, a legislator, and the founding spirit of Athens, the city destined to become known as the cradle of civilization. His story is a tapestry woven with myth, memory, the thunder of heroes, and the subtle whisper of political maneuvering. Within him resided both brute strength and sharp intellect, the dual spirit of a nation that revered Athena both with a spear in hand and an olive branch upon her brow. Theseus was born of two fathers, King Aegeus of Athens and Poseidon, god of the sea. His mother, Aethra, conceived with both on the same night, one mortal, one divine. From this dual union emerged a boy of destiny, raised far from Athens in the city of Treason, unaware of the royal blood that flowed through his veins. Before departing, Aegeus had concealed a sword and sandals beneath a heavy stone, instructing Aethra that when the boy possessed the strength to lift the stone, he would be ready to claim his birthright. In time, Theseus grew tall and keen-eyed, his limbs restless, his mind sharp. At the age of 16, he moved the stone with a grunt and a grin, claiming his father's tokens. While many would have chosen the safer and easier sea route to Athens, Theseus opted for the land route, the longer and more perilous path, believing that true kingship must be earned through trials, not merely inherited. Thus began the 6 labors of Theseus, not the vast, godlike trials of Heracles, but intimate and grounded, each a localized terror that plagued the common man. He defeated Periphetes, the club-bearer, claiming the weapon as a symbol of his strength. He slew Cines, who tortured travelers by tying them to bent pine trees and tearing them asunder. This was not yet the war of Homer's Iliad, which would begin in the 10th year, but the war itself had already begun, not merely with spears and walls, but in the breaking of oaths, the violation of trust, the sacrifice of daughters, and the judgment of gods. It was a war born not only of love, but of pride, of divine rivalry and mortal vanity, of ancient curses and deep-seated fears, and it would end not with victory, but with fire. By the time Homer's Iliad begins, the war at Troy had dragged on for 9 long years. The Greeks, those stern-faced kings who had once roared across the Aegean, had settled into a grim rhythm of siege and survival. What had begun in fury and fire became something colder, slower, more desperate. They built black-walled camps along the shore, hauled their ships high upon the sand, and sent out raiding parties day after day, not just to battle, but to feed their armies. The war dragged on like an old wound that refused to heal, and both sides felt the infection deepening. The Trojans, secure behind their mighty walls, raised, it was said, by Poseidon himself and the mortal builder Apollo, had once served in penance, suffered but endured. The fields outside the city had long been razed. Their allies came from the east and north, Sarpedon of Lycia, Memnon of Ethiopia, and others, bringing new life to an old cause. And yet the Greeks would not leave, not without Helen. Pride held them there as much as oaths. The war had become a matter of legacy. But war does not live in walls and ships. It lives in the hearts of men. And in this war, two hearts burned hotter than the rest. Agamemnon, king of kings, stern and imperial, and Achilles, son of Thetis and Peleus, unmatched in battle, fated to die young, and determined to make that death matter. The quarrel between these two would shatter the fragile Greek alliance. It began, as so many quarrels do, over a woman. To worship Dionysus was not to bow before power, but to surrender to it completely. And with Dionysus came something new to the Greek world. Mystery cults, religions of initiation, secrecy, and rebirth. Unlike the formal rites of Olympus, mystery cults promised something personal. In the Eleusinian mysteries, followers of Demeter and Persephone reenacted the story of the descent and return of a daughter lost to death and found again. The Orphics, followers of the poet-mystic Orpheus, spoke of Dionysus as a god torn apart and resurrected, a god whose suffering brought wisdom and whose rites promised freedom from the cycle of rebirth. These mysteries did not reject the Olympians, but they moved beneath them, quieter and deeper. They offered hope where the thundering gods gave only law. They whispered of a soul that could endure, that could transcend the mortal body. And in that promise, the old certainties began to tremble. Even on Olympus, the cracks began to show. The gods feuded more bitterly. Ares and Athena vied for the hearts of warriors. Apollo fell in love too often and too fatally. Hyacinthus, Daphne, Caronis, leaving death and transformation in his wake. Aphrodite, jealous and capricious, punished mortals for the very desires she stirred. The gods began to resemble the mortals they ruled. Proud, fickle, wounded, and lost. In Dionysus, the Olympian order met its mirror and its undoing. He was divine and yet lived as a wanderer. He brought joy, yet left madness. He tore down kings and raised up peasants. And most importantly, he changed the nature of divinity itself. The gods were no longer aloof and eternal. Through mystery, through ritual, through wine and song and madness, mortals could feel the breath of God within them, not in temples, but in themselves. And somewhere in the distance, beyond the wine-dark seas and the marble columns, new gods stirred. Rome was rising. The world was changing. In time, its temples replaced the old ones. Its hymns drowned out the liars, and its priests denounced the Olympians as demons or fictions. By the reign of Theodosius I, pagan temples were legally closed, the Olympic Games abolished, and sacrificial rites outlawed. The gods did not resist. There was no final war between Zeus and Christ, no divine siege of Jerusalem or Rome. The Olympians simply faded, like the last light of a long day. Their statues stood weathered and silent. Their altars grew cold, marble columns cracked, and ivy climbed where priests once stood. The myths remained, but as literature, not faith. Children learned of Heracles in schools, not shrines. Artists painted Athena, but did not pray to her. The gods who had once commanded storms and fates were now stories, beautiful, strange, haunting. And yet they endured. Even as their temples crumbled, they lived on in whispers, in poetry, in the architecture of the Western imagination. They reappeared in Renaissance paintings, in Enlightenment philosophy, in romantic epics, and modern retellings. They became archetypes of war and wisdom, of love and betrayal, of hubris and glory. The Greeks had given them human faces and, in doing so, had made them eternal in a different way. Though the temples fell and the oracles fell silent, the myths of Olympus did not die. They became echoes, faint at first, like a distant lyre strummed in the wind, then louder as time passed, and the world once again began to listen. For myths, unlike kingdoms, are not bound by stone and sword. They endure in the realm of imagination, and there the gods have always found a way to return. During the long centuries of Christian dominance in Europe, the gods were not worshipped, but neither were they forgotten. Monks and scholars copied ancient texts, sometimes grudgingly preserving Homer and Hesiod, Euripides and Sophocles, even as they condemned the beliefs these works once sustained. He told Rhea it was necessary, that he would not suffer the same fate as Uranus, that the throne must be protected. Rhea, though proud and strong, was powerless against him. She wept, but her tears changed nothing. 5 times she gave birth, and 5 times she lost her children to the hunger of her husband's fear. But the 6th time she resolved to act. When she felt the child stir in her womb, she did not go to Cronus. She fled instead to the island of Crete, where the mountains met the sky and deep caves opened beneath the earth. There, hidden among shepherds and nymphs, she gave birth to her youngest son, Zeus. And from the moment of his birth, Rhea knew he was different. His cry shook the trees. His eyes opened before his first breath. And when he grasped her finger, he held it with the strength of fate itself. To deceive Cronus, Rhea wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and presented it to him with trembling hands. He swallowed it greedily, thinking the danger had passed. But beneath Mount Ida, the infant Zeus was nursed in secret. He was guarded by the Curetes, warriors who danced and clashed their shields to drown out the sound of his cries, and fed by the goat Amalthea, whose milk gave him strength beyond measure. And as Zeus grew, so did the storm that would one day break the world. Yet for now the age of Cronus held. The sky was high, the earth was green, and the Titans ruled from their thrones, oblivious to the gathering wind. But deep within Cronus, 5 children stirred in the dark. And far to the west, a child born in secrecy watched the stars and waited. In the hidden folds of Mount Ida, where the air was thin and the wind whispered ancient names through stone and pine, Zeus grew to manhood. Raised in secret, far from his father's gaze, he learned of the world not through books or scrolls, but from the silence of the high peaks, the rustling of leaves, and the cautious stories murmured by his guardians in firelight. And yet, even in chains, Prometheus did not repent. He knew a secret, a truth Zeus feared above all, that one day the king of the gods would fall, not by blade or rebellion, but by his own seed. It was this knowledge that protected Prometheus, for Zeus could not destroy him without first uncovering the name of the woman who would bear his doom. So the Titan waited, bound but unbowed, as men lit fires in the dark and told stories of the one who had dared to steal from the gods. The gods, for all their glory, were not alone in shaping the world. Beneath Olympus, on the soil that drank the rain and felt the sun's warmth, mankind struggled, rose, and fell again and again. Their lives, short and flickering beside the long memories of the immortals, still left a mark. And though Zeus ruled the skies and Poseidon stirred the seas, it was the deeds of mortals that filled the earth with both beauty and sorrow. The poets who lived after would look back on this long, winding journey and see not one mankind but many, each born into its own era, marked by the blessings and punishments of the gods. It was Hesi, the Boeotian farmer and poet, who first set these ages into words, dividing the long march of human existence into 5 distinct epochs: gold, silver, bronze, heroic, and iron. Each was lesser than the one before, save one. In the beginning there was the Golden Age, and it was unlike any time that followed. It came during the reign of Crones, before the gods had learned to fear rebellion, and before the earth bore the weight of iron or war. In those days, men lived like gods themselves, free from pain, untouched by age, and unburdened by toil. The earth gave forth her bounty without coaxing, offering harvests in every season. There was no need for laws or swords, no need for kings or coins. These early mortals knew no hunger, no sickness, no grief. He hurled Chiron from the cliffs into the sea, putting an end to a tyrant who forced passers-by to wash his feet only to kick them to their deaths. He bested Circean the wrestler, outmaneuvering his brute force with superior technique. And he vanquished Procrustes, who forced travelers to fit his beds by either stretching them or cutting off their limbs, meeting his own end upon the same iron frame. Theseus did more than merely survive. He cleansed the land as he traversed it, paving the way for Athens to rise. Upon his arrival in Athens, King Aegeus failed to recognize him. Medea, now Aegeus' wife and still harboring potent sorceries, sensed the threat the young man posed and urged the king to poison him. But Theseus presented the sword and sandals, and at the last moment, Aegeus cast the poisoned cup aside, embracing his son before the entire court. Joy, of course, rarely lingers for long in Greek myths. Trouble was already brewing in the east. For years, Athens had suffered under a bitter tribute. After a war with the island of Crete, Athens had been defeated, and as punishment, King Minos demanded 7 young men and 7 maidens be sent every 9 years to be sacrificed to the Minotaur, a monstrous half-man, half-bull, born of lust and vengeance and confined within a labyrinth beneath the palace at Knossos. The creature was a consequence of Minos's hubris. When Poseidon sent a magnificent bull from the sea, Minos was meant to sacrifice it to the god, but instead he kept it for himself. As punishment, the gods cursed his wife, Pasiphae, to fall in love with the beast. From their unnatural union came the Minotaur, Asterius, horned and violent, a living shame sealed away within the intricate maze designed by Daedalus, the great inventor. Theseus, upon learning of the tribute, volunteered himself as one of the chosen. He would journey not as a lamb to the slaughter, but as a hunter entering the lair of the beast. In one of their many raids, the Greeks had taken captives, among them Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo, and Briseis, a princess of Lyrnessus. Chryseis was awarded to Agamemnon, Briseis to Achilles. When Chryseis' father came to ransom her, bearing golden gifts and reverent words, Agamemnon scorned him. The old man prayed to Apollo, and the god answered not with fire from the sky, but with plague, a silent killer that passed from beast to man, filling the air with death. The prophet Calchas at last revealed the truth. Agamemnon, forced to surrender Chryseis to save his army, did so, but in turn demanded Briseis from Achilles as compensation. It was a slight Achilles could not endure. He rose from the council in fury, called Agamemnon a greedy coward, and swore an oath before the gods. He would no longer fight for the Greeks. Let them bleed without him. And so he withdrew to his tent, and with him went the Myrmidons, his elite warriors, silent and dangerous, forged for war. From that moment, the tide turned. Without Achilles, the Greeks began to suffer. The Trojans pressed harder. Hector, son of Priam and champion of Troy, led the charge with a quiet, noble fury. He was not Paris, who had brought the war, nor Deiphobus, who sought glory. Hector was the heart of the city, a husband, a father, a prince who carried the burden of his people, not in pride, but in duty. Day by day, the Trojans pushed the Greeks back to the sea. Ships were set ablaze. Heroes fell. Protesilaus, the first Greek to leap ashore, had died in the first skirmish. Now, Patroclus, friend and companion of Achilles, watched the losses mount with growing despair. Some say Patroclus was a friend, others a lover, but all agree he was the only one who could reach Achilles in his grief and fury. When the Trojans breached the Greek defenses and threatened to burn the ships, Patroclus begged Achilles to let him fight in his stead. And Olympus, for all its thrones and thunders, could already feel the wind shifting on the mountaintop. The Olympians, for all their immortality and glory, did not confine their stories to the high halls of Olympus. They descended again and again into the world of men, as lovers, tempters, warriors, or punishers. They mingled with mortals and left behind not just oracles or omens, but children. These children of gods and mortals, demigods, were born into a world that neither fully embraced them nor could ever fully contain them. Some became kings, others monsters, but a few became legends, their stories lasting longer than the walls of Troy or even the temples of the gods who sired them. Foremost among these was Heracles, the son of Zeus and Alcmene, a mortal queen of Thebes. His conception was marked by trickery. Zeus came to Alcmene in the form of her husband, drawing out the night so that it lasted twice as long. From that deception, Heracles was born, already shadowed by Hera's wrath. For Hera, the queen of heaven, could never abide her husband's infidelities, and she made Heracles' life a crucible of torment. While still in his cradle, she sent serpents to kill him, and the infant strangled them with his bare hands. Heracles grew into a man of impossible strength, but it was not brute force that defined his legend, but penance. In a fit of divinely sent madness, Hera's vengeance again, he killed his wife and children. Racked by grief, he sought purification at the oracle of Delphi. There he was told to serve Eurystheus, a petty king, and complete 12 labors, each more impossible than the last. He wrestled the Nemean lion, whose hide no blade could pierce. He slew the Lernaean hydra, cauterizing each writhing neck. He captured the Erymanthian boar, cleansed the stables of Augeas in a single day, drove away the Stymphalian birds, and tamed the Cretan bull. The old stories survived not in temples but in libraries, tucked between sermons and treatises, waiting. And then came the Renaissance, that great turning of the wheel when Europe looked backward to move forward. In the courts of Florence, in the chapels of Rome, in the minds of thinkers like Petrarch and Erasmus, the gods rose again not as deities, but as symbols of human nature. Painters draped Aphrodite in seashells and light. Sculptors gave Apollo his bow and grace. Poets invoked the muse once more. Myth was reborn in marble and canvas, not altar and incense. The gods no longer ruled the sky, but they reigned in art. In the age of enlightenment, reason challenged superstition, and yet the myths endured. They were studied, translated, dissected. To Voltaire they were allegories. To Goethe they were mirrors of the soul. Romanticism followed, and with it, a return to the emotional, the tragic, the sublime. Writers looked to Oedipus and Antigone, to Orpheus and Eurydice, and found in them eternal questions. What is fate? What is love? What does it mean to be human? Then came the modern age. Myth was no longer confined to classical study. It appeared in literature, cinema, psychology, even comics. Carl Jung saw the gods as archetypes within the human mind, eternally re-emerging. James Joyce wove them into Dublin streets. Rick Riordan reimagined them for schoolchildren in Manhattan. In Marvel and DC Comics, the gods walked again, not in robes and sandals, but in armor and spandex. And always in the background, there remained the old tales, unchanged. Odysseus still sailed. Heracles still labored. Persephone still rose each spring. They were not forgotten. They were simply translated, generation to generation, into new forms, new tongues, new dreams. Because myth is not fixed. It is living memory shaped by those who carry it. He drank the milk of the divine goat Amalthea, who had nourished him from birth, and from her broken horn torn by accident or omen, was born the cornucopia, symbol of endless bounty. When Amalthea died, Zeus hung her hide among the stars in her honor, and her memory became part of the sky he would one day command. But he was not born to stargazing or solitude. The blood in his veins was thick with prophecy, and his bones carried the weight of rebellion. As he came of age, Gaia herself began to stir. She remembered the betrayal of Cronus, the pain of her imprisoned sons, the 100-handed ones, and the Cyclopes buried deep in Tartarus. Her vengeance had not ended with Uranus. It had only been delayed. With words as old as stone, she whispered truth into Zeus's dreams, and in his waking hours, she guided his steps. First, she led him to Métis, the Titaness of wisdom, whose counsel was shrewd and whose loyalty leaned toward the future. With Métis's aid, Zeus fashioned a plan. To strike against Cronus, a king of titans and time, would require more than strength. It would demand cunning. Zeus returned in disguise to the house of his father, and there, with Métis's craft, he offered Cronus a potion laced in wine, bittersweet and thick as honey. The drink stirred the old Titan's gut, and at last, with a shudder and a groan, Cronus vomited forth the children he had swallowed long ago. They came not as infants, but full-grown and gleaming, clad in the strength of gods, reborn into a world already poised for war. First Hestia, goddess of hearth and flame, then Demeter, goddess of the grain, then Hera, regal and sharp-eyed, then Hades, lord of the dead, and at last Poseidon, master of the deep. The 6 siblings stood together for the first time as one and looked to the throne that had cast them into darkness. They would not forget, but Cronus was not without allies. When their time came, they did not wither or suffer but died as if falling into sleep, their spirits becoming guardians, pure and watchful, wandering the world as kindly daemonies, protectors of justice and peace. Theirs was a life of harmony, and theirs was the closest any mortal would ever come to Eden. But the golden age passed, as all golden things do. With the fall of cronies and the rise of Zeus, the silver age dawned, a time of beauty dimmer and souls less noble. These mortals grew tall and strong, living long lives, but they lacked the wisdom and restraint of the golden race. They lingered in childhood for 100 years, ignorant and pampered, only to grow into violent, arrogant men who refused to honor the gods or heed their decrees. They built no temples, gave no offerings, and mocked the laws of Olympus. For this Zeus struck them down. Their spirits did not become guardians or watchful daimons, but faded into the underworld, pale and forgotten. Theirs was a race lost to pride and disobedience, a mirror of divine fear come true. Then came the Bronze Age, born of ash trees, the same trees used for spears and shields. These were not gentle men. They were creatures of war, mighty and hard, their very flesh said to be forged from bronze. Their homes were bronze. Their tools were bronze. Their hearts seemed cast from the same metal. They lived for battle and died by it, sowing the world with blood and ash. They were terrible to behold but not evil, only driven by the rhythm of war drums and the clash of arms. They built no cities, wrote no poems, carved no statues. When they died, they left little behind but shattered swords and empty fields. Even the gods did not mourn their passing. They sank into Hades without echo or prayer. Yet not all decline is steady. From the blood and smoke of the Bronze Age rose a brief and brilliant light. The heroic age, a time unlike any other. It was not part of the descent but an interlude of glory before the fall. Before his departure, he promised his father that if he were successful, he would return with white sails upon his ship. If he failed, the sails would remain black. Upon his arrival in Crete, fate took another turn. Ariadne, daughter of Minos and half-sister to the Minotaur, saw Theseus and was captivated by him. She provided him with a gift, a ball of thread, a vital clue, and revealed the secret to navigating the labyrinth's winding paths. That night, Theseus entered the maze. In its dark and confusing coils, where stone endlessly mirrored stone, he confronted the Minotaur. They battled without words, a prince against a nightmare. Theseus, armed with skill and a sharpened blade, struck the creature down, then followed the thread back into the light. He fled with Ariadne and the freed Athenians, sailing into the Aegean Sea. Yet, love in Greek stories is never uncomplicated. On the island of Naxos, Theseus abandoned Ariadne. Some say Dionysus claimed her for his own. Others claim Theseus feared what a Cretan bride might signify for his Athenian throne. She awoke alone, weeping beneath unfamiliar stars. Theseus continued homeward, but in his sorrow, or perhaps in a moment of forgetfulness, he failed to change the sails. From the cliffs of Athens, King Aegeus saw the black sails on the horizon and, believing his son to be dead, was consumed by grief. In despair, he leapt into the sea, which to this day bears his name, the Aegean. Now king, Theseus did not rest. He unified Attica, the region surrounding Athens, binding its villages into a single city-state. He established festivals and games, temples and laws. He was a hero of governance as much as of combat. He ventured again and again into the realm of myth, fighting alongside Heracles against the Amazons and journeying to the underworld with Pirithous, his reckless friend, to abduct Persephone herself from Hades. That journey ended in failure. He donned the hero's armor, rode his chariot, led the Myrmidons into battle, and for a time the Greeks rallied. But Patroclus, flushed with borrowed glory, went too far. He reached the gates of Troy, and there he met Hector. Their duel was brutal, and it ended with Patroclus falling beneath Hector's spear, and with him fell whatever peace remained in Achilles' heart. When Achilles learned of his death, his grief shook the camp. He did not weep like a man. He howled like a storm god filled with rage and ruin. He returned to battle not for glory, not for oaths, but for vengeance. His mother, Thetis, brought him new armor forged by Hephaestus himself, bronze that gleamed like the sun, a shield carved with the history of the world. Then Achilles went to war. No one could stand against him. He slaughtered men by the dozen, chariots overturned, blood staining the dust. He chased Hector around the walls of Troy 3 times before they met in single combat. Hector fought bravely, but Achilles was a fire no water could quench. He struck Hector down, pierced him through, and in rage dragged his body behind his chariot, circling the city day after day, denying the dead prince the dignity of burial. It was Priam, the old king of Troy, who brought an end to that madness. At night, guided by Hermes, he crept into the Greek camp and knelt before Achilles. He kissed the hands that had killed his son. He spoke not as a king, but as a father, and Achilles finally wept. He returned Hector's body and gave Priam safe passage. For a moment, there was quiet in the war, but peace, as always, was fleeting. Achilles would not survive the war. A poisoned arrow, some say fired by Paris, others guided by Apollo, struck his heel, the only vulnerable part of him. He died in the dust, young and unmatched, and the war dragged on without him. The Iliad ends not with the fall of Troy, but with a funeral and a shared grief. Yet the war still loomed. The gods were not finished, nor were the Greeks. He stole the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons, seized the cattle of Geryon, fetched the golden apples of the Hesperides, and descended into Hades to bring back the hound Cerberus. Each trial was more than a feat of strength. They were encounters with death, with the edge of the world, with the very fabric of human suffering. Through them, Heracles became more than a hero. He became a symbol of mortal endurance, of pain redeemed through effort. At his death, poisoned by a robe soaked in the blood of a centaur, he built his own funeral pyre and climbed atop it, mortal no longer. The gods took him to Olympus, where even Hera at last accepted him as divine. He became the only mortal to join the pantheon, a god forged in agony. Yet, Heracles was not the first demigod, nor the only one whose story shaped the fate of mortals. Long before him came Perseus, another son of Zeus, born of Danae, who was imprisoned in a bronze tower because of a prophecy that her child would kill her father. But fate, once set in motion, cannot be locked away. Zeus came to her not as a man, but as a shower of gold, and from that union, Perseus was born. Abandoned at sea in a chest, mother and child survived and were taken in by a kind fisherman. But again, a king's lust, this time Polydectes, who desired Danae, set Perseus on a path of peril. Ordered to bring back the head of Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone, Perseus embarked on his quest armed by the gods. Hermes gave him a sword, Athena a polished shield. He stole the eye of the Graeae, the old Grey sisters who shared one eye among them, and learned the Gorgon's location. With Athena's guidance, he approached Medusa as she slept, using the mirror of his shield to strike without looking, and severed her head. From her neck sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, a warrior of gold. Perseus escaped with their help, and on his return journey, rescued Andromeda from a sea monster, married her, and founded dynasties. What the Greeks gave us was not just a pantheon, but a framework, a way to explain the world, to wrestle with death, to honor beauty, to understand the self. Their gods were flawed, yes, but gloriously so. In them we saw not perfection, but potential, the agony of choice, the thrill of risk, the pain of hubris, the comfort of ritual. They told us what we might become and what we must fear. Even now, in a world of science and silence, the myths still murmur. You hear them in stories of chosen heroes, in fallen stars, in the slow turn of the seasons. A girl descends and spring waits. A king defies prophecy and loses everything. A mother grieves the son. The faces change, but the truths do not. The gods may have left Olympus, but they never truly left us. They walk quietly now in books and songs, in dreams and memories, in every tale that dares to reach beyond the mortal veil. They are not dead. They have simply moved. And now the story ends. The winds on Mount Olympus are cold. The torches in Delphi are ash. But the myths remain. Good night. The Titans rallied to him, his brothers and sisters gathering atop Mount Othrys, the old seat of power in the south. Oceanus remained apart, too old or too wise for blood feuds. But the others, Zeus, Crius, Hyperion, Iapetus, took up arms. So began the war the poets called the Titanomachy. The clash of Titans and Olympians, a war that tore across the heavens and split the earth to its core. For 10 years, the battle raged without end. The sky darkened with storm and smoke. Thunder and fire echoed across the mountains, and the world below, still young and silent, watched in dread as its masters fought for the right to rule. The Titans held Othries, tall and time-worn, while Zeus and his kin made their stand upon Mount Olympus, a peak still unscarred by war. The battles were terrible and unrelenting. Lightning tore open the skies, and tidal waves swallowed islands whole. Volcanoes bled fire, and winds howled like wolves. At times, the war seemed endless, neither side able to land the final blow. But Gaia, ever watchful, knew that the balance could not tip without what had been long buried. She counseled Zeus once more. If he were to win, he must descend into Tartarus and free his monstrous uncles, the Cyclopes and the Centimanes, whom Cronus had kept locked in chains out of fear. With his siblings beside him, Zeus broke the gates of the underworld and released the imprisoned powers. The Cyclopes, grateful and eager, gifted Zeus his greatest weapon, the thunderbolt, the symbol of sky and storm. To Poseidon, they gave the trident with which he would command the seas, and to Hades, a helm of darkness that would make him unseen. The Centimanes, giants with 100 hands, joined the fight at last, hurling mountains like stones and battering the Titans with the fury of ancient things unbound. With these allies, the tide turned. The Olympians pressed forward with a fury no Titan could match. Cronus, proud and unyielding, fought to the last. These mortals were greater than those who came before or after. They were the demigods, the sons and daughters of gods and men. They built cities, sailed seas, and carved their names into the memory of the world. This was the age of Perseus and Heracles, of Theseus and Atalanta, of Jason and the Argonauts, of Hector and Achilles and Odysseus. They fought great wars against monsters, against foreign kings, and finally against each other at Troy. Many died young, and many more died forgotten. But their stories lingered, carried in song and stone, in epics and prayers. Some were granted a place in the Isles of the Blessed, far beyond ocean's edge, where heroes dwell in peace and sunlight forever. The heroic age did not last, but while it burned, it lit the world. And then came the age that Hesiod called his own, the Iron Age, where we still dwell. This is a time of sorrow and toil, a world grown old and heavy. Men now labor from dawn to dusk, planting seeds in bitter soil, raising children amid war and famine, growing old with pain and fear. In the Iron Age, bonds break easily between friends, between kin, between guest and host. Justice, once tall and golden, now walks with her eyes averted. Lies are many, oaths are cheap, and the gods, if they still watch, do so with silence. In this age, mortals build towers but forget their ancestors. They chase gold and power and cut down the forests that fed them. It is an age of struggle, and it is said that one day even this will pass. One day the gods will turn their backs entirely. One day Zeus will cast down his thunderbolt, and humankind will vanish like smoke on the wind. Yet for all that, the Iron Age endures. Men still build, still hope, still tell stories of a time when mortals were golden and gods walked among them. And perhaps that hope, fragile though it is the one gift Zeus did not take back when Pandora opened the jar. Pirithous was swallowed by the earth, and Theseus was trapped upon the chair of forgetfulness. His memory and will eroded by the air of death. Only Heracles, on one of his own labors, was able to tear him free. But time, as it always does, turns. In the end, the Athenians, weary of kings and drawn to new heroes and emerging philosophies, drove Theseus into exile. He fled to the island of Skyros, where he was betrayed by a jealous king and cast from a cliff to his death. His bones would later be retrieved by the Athenians and buried with honor, but at the time of his death, he was alone. No crowd, no crown, no chorus. And yet his legacy endured. Where Heracles symbolized the strength of the body, Theseus embodied the strength of the polis, the city, the law, the people bound together by something greater than blood. Athens would rise upon his shoulders, and though it would worship Athena, it would forever remember the king who built its foundations. Long before Troy burned and long after the Titans fell, there unfolded a voyage unlike any other. A quest that traversed continents and challenged gods, binding heroes together in brotherhood, yet ultimately ending in betrayal and exile. It was a tale of dragons and oaths, of kings usurped and thrones reclaimed. At its heart was Jason, a prince exiled in childhood, a hero forged not by war or prophecy, but by the slow, smoldering fire of vengeance. His story began in Iolcus, a coastal kingdom in Thessaly. Jason's father, Ezon, had been overthrown by his own brother, Peleus, a man who recognized no law but the pursuit of power. Fearful of the boy who might one day rise against him, Peleus sought to eliminate Jason at birth. But Ezon, forewarned, sent the infant away, smuggling him from the court and entrusting him to the care of Chiron, the wise centaur who had mentored Achilles, Asclepius, and other sons of destiny. The wooden horse had not yet been carved. The gates had not yet opened, but the blood had been spilled, and the tide would soon turn. The war had bled the land dry. 10 years of siege had turned warriors into husks, kings into ghosts, and heroes into memories. Troy, once golden, stood behind its walls like an old lion surrounded by wolves. The sons of Priam had fallen one by one. Hector, the shield of the city, laid low by Achilles. Troilus, struck down while still a boy. Polydorus, slaughtered in betrayal. The Trojans fought with the desperation of men defending not just stone but history. And yet they endured year after year while the Greeks grew weary and restless beside their smoking campfires. Then, just as the gods began to turn their gaze elsewhere, the Greeks vanished. At dawn, the Trojans climbed their towers and saw no sails upon the sea. The ships were gone. In their place, on the plain outside the Scaean gate, stood a colossal wooden horse, tall as a temple, its flanks stitched from smooth planked cedar, its mane carved in honor of Poseidon. No soldiers stirred, no weapons clashed. The war, it seemed, had ended in silence. Troy did not rejoice easily. Priam, old and cautious, questioned what he saw. Others urged caution. But it was Sinon, a cunning Greek left behind, who broke the city's fate wide open. Pretending to be a deserter, he spun a tale so clever it might have come from Odysseus's own mouth. The horse, he said, was an offering to Athena, a peace token left behind after the Greeks had sailed away. If the Trojans brought it into their city, it would guarantee their dominance for generations. But if they dared destroy it, ruin would follow. Only Laocoon, priest of Poseidon, spoke the truth. "Beware Greeks bearing gifts," he warned, and hurled a spear into the side of the horse. The wood groaned. Something shifted within. His lineage would carry on to Heracles, linking their stories by blood and fate. There were others. Theseus, son of Poseidon or Aegeus, depending on the telling, who slew the Minotaur in the labyrinth of Knossos, bringing Athens its first taste of empire. Bellerophon, rider of Pegasus, who killed the Chimera, but flew too high and fell. Atalanta, raised by bears and swift as the wind, sometimes said to be the daughter of Artemis herself, who raced suitors and killed boars, but was undone by love and distraction. The demigods were never allowed peace. Their blood was too divine for comfort, too mortal for eternity. The gods watched them with pride and fear, for each one tested the boundary between Olympus and earth, and the mortals worshipped them not just for their triumphs, but for their struggles. They suffered, bled, and sometimes died, but in doing so, they became immortal in a way the gods never could, through story. As the memory of Troy faded, as cities rose and fell, the tales of these children endured. They filled amphory and temple friezes, echoed in poems and plays. And though the gods remained on Olympus, distant and growing more silent, it was in the lives of their mortal-born children that humanity found its mirrors, flawed, courageous, doomed, and glorious. In the world of Greek myth, power did not rest solely in the hands of gods or heroes. There was something older still, something deeper, humming beneath every choice and every death, every victory and every sorrow. Fate. It was not a god, though the gods themselves feared it. It was not a law, though it governed even the divine. Fate was a truth, a force like gravity, unseen but inescapable, woven into the bones of the world. The Greeks called it Moira, and sometimes she had faces, the Moirai or Fates. 3 sisters who spun, measured, and cut the thread of every life. Clotho spun the thread, Lachesis measured its length, and Atropos, the one who could not be turned, cut it when the time came. But the prophecy, as always, unfolded without mercy. The Titans fell. One by one, they were driven down, cast from the high places of the earth. Zeus did not slay them. He imprisoned them as his father had done before. Deep into Tartarus they were hurled, bound in chains forged by the 100-handed ones behind bronze gates that would never rust or break. Only a few escaped that fate. Prometheus and Epimetheus, who had sided with the gods, and Themis, who foresaw the justice of their rule. So ended the reign of the Titans. The sky cleared, and the world, scarred by fire and war, began to heal. The throne passed to Zeus, not by birthright, but by might and wisdom and fate fulfilled. Yet even as he claimed the heavens, the shadow of Cronus's curse lingered behind him like the echo of an old song. For power once seized must always be watched, and no ruler, god or mortal, sits secure forever. When the war was over and the world lay quiet beneath the sky once more, the victors stood amidst the rubble of creation. The Titans were chained in the depths of Tartarus, their groans swallowed by that black abyss from which no echo returned. The old order had been broken, but with the storm of war ended, the gods faced a new challenge, perhaps greater than any battle, to rule. For conquest may be won with fire and fury, but rule demands judgment, patience, and division. The world was wide and wild and filled with powers both known and yet unnamed. Could not be held by one alone. Zeus, eldest among the gods now born again, stood at the center of this new age. Though not the firstborn, he was first in might, first in cunning, and first to move when action was demanded. But the old laws, carved not on stone, but into the bones of the cosmos itself, did not grant him sole dominion. In the waning light between the age of gods and the age of men, there came a generation of mortals unlike those before or after, men born not from clay alone, but from divine blood and mortal wombs, shaped by both Olympus and earth. These were the heroes. Their lives were brief, their fates often cruel, but their names would echo through time like the rumble of a distant storm. Among the first and greatest of them was Perseus, slayer of monsters, founder of dynasties, and by blood and deed, the forerunner of all who would wear a hero's crown. Perseus's tale begins not in battle but in prophecy and fear. His mother, Danae, was a princess of Argos, daughter to King Acreus. The king, like all kings of that age, feared what he could not control. An oracle warned him that his daughter would bear a son destined to kill him. Such prophecies in myth, as in life, cannot be bribed or reasoned with. So Acreus did what kings so often do when faced with a truth they fear. He sought to destroy the cause. He locked Dania in a tower of bronze beneath the earth, a room sealed against time and men alike. But the gods, as they often did, laughed at mortal precautions. Zeus, in the form of golden rain, slipped through cracks no wall could keep and fell upon Dan in her solitude. From that union Perseus was conceived. When Acreus discovered the child, he dared not spill royal blood directly, for even tyrants fear the wrath of the gods. Instead, he placed Danae and her infant son into a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, trusting Poseidon or chance to drown them. But the sea is as fickle as fate. The chest did not sink but drifted across the wine-dark waves to the island of Seriphos, where a humble fisherman named Dictys drew it ashore. He took them in, raised Perseus as his own, and in time the boy grew tall and strong, with the bearing of kings and the eyes of storms. But peace is never a long companion to those who carry destiny. Jason grew strong in the wild, nourished by honey and knowledge, his limbs hardened by hunting, his mind shaped by tales of fallen and resurrected kings. Years passed. Jason returned a man, clad in a single sandal. As he crossed the river Anoris, he had lost one to the muddy current while carrying an old woman across. The woman, of course, was Hera in disguise, testing the young hero's character. Upon Jason's arrival in the city, Peleus caught sight of the one-sandaled stranger and paled, for the oracle had once warned him, "Beware the man who comes with one shoe." Jason, bold but not reckless, did not draw his sword or raise a cry. He spoke plainly, declaring himself Aeson's son and the rightful heir. Peleus, too cunning to resort to open violence, feigned welcome and proposed a trial. "If you desire to be king," he declared, "then prove your worth. Retrieve for me the golden fleece from the distant land of Colchis. Bring back that ancient prize, and I shall yield the crown." The ram had borne Phrixus across the sea, and upon his arrival in Colchis, he sacrificed the beast in gratitude. Its fleece, as radiant as fire, was nailed to an oak within a sacred grove, guarded by serpents and shadows, watched over by King Aedes, son of the sun god Helios. No Greek had ever journeyed there and returned. Yet Jason accepted the challenge. He summoned the greatest heroes of his time to join him, and they responded not as conscripted soldiers, but as eager volunteers, each seeking glory and renown. Heracles answered the call, as did Orpheus, with his enchanting lyre. Atalanta, the huntress, Castor and Pollux, the twin sons of Zeus, Meleager, Theseus, Zetes, and Calais, the winged sons of the north wind, 50 heroes in all. Together, they boarded a ship named the Argo, crafted by Argus under Athena's watchful eye. Within its prow, she embedded a piece of sacred oak from Dodona, a timber imbued with the power of prophecy. But in that moment, as if the gods themselves had tired of warning men, a pair of sea serpents, great and coiled, with eyes like burning coals, rose from the surf and crushed Laocoon and his sons in their coils. The people, seeing this, called it a sign. Troy had refused the gods' gift once before. They would not do so again. With ropes and wheels, with cheers and hymns, they brought the horse inside their walls. That night, while the city feasted and the fires died down to embers, a trapdoor in the belly of the beast opened with a groan like thunder. Out came Odysseus, Menelaus, Neoptolemus, Diomedes, and others, hand-picked for cruelty and cunning. At the same hour, the Greek fleet, hidden on the nearby island of Tenedos, returned silently under cover of night. Troy slept. What followed was not war. It was slaughter. Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, stormed through the palace like a black wind. He killed Priam at the altar of Zeus, the old king's blood soaking the stones. Cassandra, daughter of Priam and cursed prophetess, was dragged screaming from the temple of Athena, her warnings once again unheard. Hecuba, queen of Troy, watched her sons die and her city burn. The Greeks showed no mercy. Astyanax, Hector's infant son, was thrown from the walls so no heir might one day rise. Temples were desecrated, women taken, and the city of Troy, once the pride of Asia, was given to flame. Helen, whose face had launched 1,000 ships, was found in the palace. Some say she wept and begged for forgiveness. Others say she stood proud, untouched by grief. Menelaus, blade in hand, looked into her eyes and dropped the sword. He took her back to Sparta, and the war at last claimed its final victory. When dawn rose over the plain, nothing remained but smoke and ash. The walls had fallen. The gods turned their eyes away, but the war did not end cleanly. The victors carried their own curses. Ajax the Lesser, who raped Cassandra in Athena's temple, was drowned at sea. Even Zeus, king of Olympus, was bound by their decisions. He might thunder and plead, but if Atropos raised her shears, no power in heaven or earth could stay her hand. And so, if fate ruled all, what hope had man? The answer lay in omens and oracles, the strange, subtle language of the gods, and the signs sent to those who dared to read them. The Greeks did not believe they could change their fates, but they believed they might understand them. To see the future was to brace oneself against it, to try, perhaps vainly, to prepare the soul. The most famous oracle in all of Greece was at Delphi, where Apollo spoke through the Pythia, a woman seated upon a tripod over a steaming chasm in the temple's stone floor. She inhaled the vapors, slipped into a trance, and delivered the words of the god in riddles and fragments. Kings, generals, and common men came to her, some to seek glory, others merely survival. But her words were never straightforward. Apollo did not deal in certainties. A prophecy like a blade could cut both ways. So many stories twisted around her cryptic pronouncements. Croesus, king of Lydia, asked the oracle if he should wage war on the Persians. She told him that if he crossed the river, he would destroy a great empire. He did not realize the empire would be his own. Oedipus was told he would kill his father and marry his mother. His parents tried to thwart the prophecy by abandoning him. He, in turn, fled his supposed home to avoid fulfilling it, only to walk straight into its jaws. The oracle, as always, had been correct. It was men's misinterpretation that doomed them. There were other oracles, too, at Dodona, where the rustling of sacred oaks revealed the will of Zeus. At Delos, where Leto gave birth to Apollo and Artemis. At Ammon in Libya, and countless smaller shrines where dreams, animal entrails, birds in flight, or the trembling of a flame gave voice to the unknowable. In war, omens were sought before every battle. He had two brothers, both tempered by war and made strong in their own right. Poseidon, who had driven the sea to foam in his wrath, and Hades, who had worn the helm of darkness and moved unseen through battlefield and cavern alike. They too had shed blood, taken risks, and suffered loss. The throne of the cosmos could not belong to Zeus alone, lest the seeds of war be sown anew, this time among brothers. And so the three gathered Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, and cast lots to divide the realms of the world. Not through bickering or force, but by fate itself did the dice fall. This was no child's game. The casting of lots was sacred, guided by the same power that had spoken through Gaia's whispers and shaped the course of the Titanomachy. They threw the bones and waited. When they landed, the world was drawn into three great dominions. To Zeus fell the sky, the broad heavens, the air between stars and peaks. He became lord of thunder and rain, master of storm and cloud, and the undisputed king of Olympus. His voice would echo in thunderclaps. His fury would blaze in lightning, and the eagle became his herald, soaring high above all. To Poseidon fell the sea, deep and restless, full of mystery and monsters. He took the oceans, the rivers, and every spring that bubbled from the earth. With his trident, he could shatter cliffs and stir the tides to rage or calm. Beneath the waves, he built a palace of coral and gold, and there he ruled not only over fish and current, but over creatures older than time, sea serpents, leviathans, and things whose names had never been spoken aloud. To Hades fell the underworld, the land of the dead. It was not a prize most would have chosen, but Hades took it with quiet resolve. He ruled the shadowed realm with stern dignity, his kingdom hidden beneath the earth where the sun did not shine. There he became master of the shades, the judge of mortal souls, and guardian of wealth hidden in the deeps. Gems, metals, and secrets lost to time. The ruler of Serapos, King Polyctes, took notice of Danae's beauty and desired her. Perseus, grown into manhood, stood between his mother and the king, a wall of defiance. Polyctes, unable to strike the sun without dishonoring himself, chose cunning over strength. He announced a false marriage, some say to Hippodamia, and demanded that all men of the island offer him a gift. Perseus, without gold or horses, boasted that he would instead bring the king a greater prize: the head of Medusa, the mortal Gorgon, whose gaze could turn flesh to stone. The task was cruel, and Polyctes knew it. No man who had sought Medusa had ever returned. She was one of 3 Gorgon sisters, born of ancient sea deities, hideous and winged, their heads wreathed in snakes, their eyes cursed. Only Medusa was mortal. Her sisters were immortal, and none could be approached without peril. But the gods, who watched the world with curious eyes, favored Perseus. Athena, born from her father's head and never one to forget a slight Medusa, after all, had once been a maiden in her temple until Poseidon's violence and pride had defiled it, lent her shield to the young hero. It was polished like a mirror, and in its reflection, one could look upon a Gorgon without meeting her gaze. Hermes, swift and shrewd, gave him a curved sword and winged sandals to fly and directed him to the Graea, the Grey sisters who shared a single eye between them and knew the secret path to the Gorgon's lair. Perseus, through wit and will, stole their eye and bargained for the truth. They told him of the nymphs who kept the sacred items he would need. The helm of Hades, which made its wearer invisible. Acabyssus, a magical sack to contain the Gorgon's head. And knowledge of the place beyond ocean's edge, where night never lifts, and the Gorgons sleep among ancient stone. Armed with these divine gifts, Perseus flew over sea and desert until he reached the ends of the earth. The ship itself became a character in their saga, whispering warnings and subtly guiding their fate. They sailed eastward, braving treacherous shores and raging tempests, venturing deep into the realm of legend. Their initial trials stemmed not from encounters with monsters, but from their interactions with men. On the island of Lemnos, they discovered a land ruled by women who had slain all their husbands. There, Jason lay with Hypsipyle, the queen of the island, and fathered sons he would never witness grow. In Thrace, they encountered the blind seer Phineus, tormented by the Harpies, winged creatures who fouled his food. The Boreads, blessed with the power of flight, drove the Harpies away, earning Phineus's gratitude and his prophecy, revealing a path through the treacherous clashing rocks, two immense cliffs that slammed shut like jaws, crushing any vessel that attempted to pass between them. Following Phineus's advice, they released a dove. It successfully navigated the passage, losing only a single tail feather. The Argo followed at full speed, and the rocks caught her stern, but only just. From that moment onward, the passage remained still. The sea, it seemed, showed respect for those who dared to challenge its might. At long last, they reached Colchis, a land of fire and iron. King Aedes did not immediately put them to death. Jason was a stranger, and in that ancient world, strangers were often afforded a degree of sacred protection. However, Aedes agreed to relinquish the Golden Fleece only if Jason could complete 3 seemingly impossible tasks. Yoke fire-breathing bulls, plow a field with them, sow the field with dragon's teeth, and then vanquish the warriors who would spring forth from the soil. These trials were not mere tests of courage, but rather demonstrations of utter impossibility. The quest would have ended there had the gods not intervened. Eros, at Hera's urging, struck Medea, daughter of Aedes, with an arrow of love. Agamemnon, returning home with Cassandra as a concubine, was murdered in his bath by his wife Clytemnestra. The house of Atreus bled on. Menelaus and Helen returned to Sparta, but their names were forever stained, and Sparta would never again rise as high as the day she left. Diomedes, Nestor, and others wandered into obscurity or exile. Odysseus, cursed by Poseidon, would not see home for 10 long years. His tale, a winding odyssey of shipwreck and monsters, would become its own legend, shaped by gods and loss. Only Aeneas, son of Anchises and Aphrodite, escaped Troy with his father on his back and his son by the hand. Guided by omens and stars, he carried the last ember of Troy westward toward Italy. From his blood, so the Romans would later claim, came Romulus, Remus, and an empire even mightier than Troy. The fall of Troy was not just the end of a city. It was the end of an age, the heroic age, where men dined with gods, where glory mattered more than peace, and where fate was carved into flesh and stone. The wooden horse, the fire, the betrayal, the mourning women. These were the final notes of a song that began with an apple and ended in ruin. The walls that had defied 10 years of siege fell in a single night, and the ashes of Troy drifted out to sea, borne on winds that did not care who had won. The fall of Troy was not the end of the story, but the beginning of another kind of tragedy, one not fought in open fields or high-walled cities, but on dark seas, in storm-tossed isles, and in the crumbling halls of once proud kings. For those who survived the war, the journey home would prove far more perilous than the war itself. The gods, unappeased by the sack of Troy, turned their fury against the victors. The winds that had once carried them to war now scattered them like leaves across the face of the world. Agamemnon, the High King, returned first, or so it seemed. A flash of lightning, a flight of crows, a sneeze at the wrong moment. These were not trifles. They were warnings, communications from the divine. A general who ignored them risked not only defeat, but cosmic punishment. Sacrifices were made before sea voyages, births, weddings. The entrails of goats and the livers of oxen were studied by seers, who divined the will of the gods in the dark, wet patterns of muscle and blood. The art of reading omens became its own power. Seers like Calchas, who guided the Greeks at Troy, or Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes, held influence equal to kings. Tiresias, in particular, touched by both male and female life, was said to have lived 7 generations, his wisdom unrivaled, his visions sometimes a curse to those who asked for them. But oracles and omens were not mere superstitions. They represented something deeper, the Greek understanding that mortals were not in control. No matter how mighty the hero, how noble the bloodline, how loyal the heart, the wheel of fate turned ever on, and in that turning, all must one day be broken. The gift of prophecy was not power. It was awareness. And awareness, too late, was often indistinguishable from tragedy. Still, men sought prophecy. They climbed mountain paths to Delphi, brought gold and goat blood, asked questions in trembling voices. For even if fate could not be changed, it could be faced. To know the storm was coming was not to stop it, but it was perhaps to die with eyes open. In this tension between knowledge and helplessness, between the known and the feared, the Greeks found meaning. Their stories were not about victory over destiny, but dignity within it. Even the gods watched the loom of the fates, unable to sever the threads they disliked. Hector knew he would die and still strapped on his armor. Achilles knew he would not return and still sailed to Troy. Oedipus sought to flee his doom and instead ran headlong into it. Though men feared his name and whispered it only when necessary, Hades kept the balance between life and death, and it was said he never once broke the laws he was sworn to uphold. The earth itself, Gaia's own flesh, was left as a common realm, shared by all. The mountains belonged to no one. The fields were roamed by mortals and spirits alike, and the forests grew wild under no single banner. It was a realm in between where gods might walk and mortals might see them, but it was also where ambition brewed and where fate would continue to work its quiet will. Thus the world was ordered, sky, sea, and underworld. The 3 brothers, now kings in their own realms, swore not to war among themselves, lest the world break anew. They built their thrones and gathered their followers. On Mount Olympus, high above the clouds, Zeus called the gods to council. There, beside him, stood his sisters. Hera, proud and sharp as winter ice, Demeter, whose steps awakened spring, and Hestia, ever burning at the hearth of every home. And others came, new and old. Athena, born from wisdom and war. Apollo, golden and far-seeing. Artemis, silent and swift. Ares, bloody-handed. Hermes, fleet of foot and mind. Hephaestus, limping but brilliant, and Aphrodite, whose smile could unravel kings. It was the beginning of a new age, the age of Olympus. But though the thrones had been set and the realms divided, the world would not stay still for long. The gods, for all their power, were not immune to pride, nor love, nor rage. And the mortals who now began to rise across the lands would bring their own stories, their own wars, and their own share of sorrow. The heavens had been won, but peace is never simple when gods sit the throne. When the smoke of war faded and the world was cast once more in sunlight, Mount Olympus became the seat of a new and glittering court. The Titans had ruled from Mount Othrys in the south, harsh, ancient, and wrapped in storm. He found them sleeping, Medusa and her sisters, curled in a shadowed grove, ringed by the statues of those who had come before. Perseus dared not look directly, and so, with Athena's shield held before him, he walked backward, step by cautious step, until he stood over the sleeping Gorgon. With one swift stroke, he severed her head, and from her blood sprang Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chryser, the warrior with a golden blade, children of Poseidon, born in death. As Medusa's sisters screamed and clawed the air, Perseus vanished into mist, hidden by the helm of darkness. The deed was done. He returned by the long road, his prize heavy in the sack, its power undiminished. On the way, he passed the shores of Ethiopia, where the sea god had sent a monster to punish King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia for their vanity. Their daughter, Andromeda, had been chained to a rock as sacrifice. Perseus, beholding her beauty and innocence, slew the beast, turned it to stone with the Gorgon's head, and claimed her as his bride. She would follow him westward, becoming the mother of his line. When at last he returned to Serapos, Polycte scoffed at his tale. So Perseus reached into the sack and withdrew the severed head. The king and his court were turned to stone where they stood. Dictys, the fisherman who had shown kindness to a mother and her child, became king in his stead. The cycle of cruelty was broken, if only for a time. But prophecy, once spoken, is not so easily undone. Perseus journeyed to Argos, where King Acreus, still haunted by the words of the oracle, fled rather than face the boy he had once condemned to death. Yet fate does not forget. At the funeral games of a neighboring king, Perseus, throwing a discus, struck an old man in the crowd. Acreus, his grandfather, who died without ever knowing that his death was no murder but an accident long foretold. So the circle closed, as they always do in myth. Perseus had fulfilled the prophecy, though not by malice. She was a priestess of Hecate, learned in the arts of herbs and poisons, untouched by men, as cold and radiant as moonlight. But at the sight of Jason, her heart betrayed her. She provided him with a potion to shield him from the flames of the bulls, instructed him to hurl a stone amidst the earthborn warriors, causing them to turn against one another, and ultimately guided him to the fleece itself, guarded by a serpent that never slept. Medea chanted spells, and the beast succumbed to slumber. Jason seized the fleece, as brilliant and soft as molten gold, and fled with Medea into the darkness. Aedes pursued them with his ships, but the lovers had secured precious time through a horrifying act of bloodshed. Medea had seized her young brother, Apsyrtus, dismembered him, and scattered his limbs in the sea, forcing her father to halt his pursuit and gather the remains for burial. The Argo slipped away, stained by crime and magic. Their return journey was a wandering odyssey, fraught with perils and delays, past Scylla and Charybdis, through lands of danger and enchantment. Eventually, they returned to Iolcus, but Peleus refused to yield the crown. Medea, consumed by vengeance, tricked his daughters into cutting him to pieces and boiling him alive, falsely claiming it was a spell of rejuvenation. Horrified by this act of treachery, the people rose up in outrage. Jason, now tainted by Medea's deeds, was exiled from Iolcus. He fled to Corinth, where he and Medea lived for years in an uneasy peace. But Jason, ever ambitious and seeking legitimacy, cast Medea aside and chose a Corinthian princess for his bride. Medea, wronged and consumed by a furious rage, unleashed a vengeance that no mortal man could withstand. She poisoned the bride's gown, burning her to ashes, and then, in an act of unspeakable horror, murdered her own sons by Jason. She fled, carried away in a chariot drawn by dragons, a gift from her grandfather, Helios. He sailed with Cassandra, the Trojan prophetess taken as a concubine, and brought with him spoils, stories, and the shadow of a crime. The gods had not forgotten the sacrifice of Iphigenia, his daughter, slain to appease Artemis before the war began. And in Mycenae, Clytemnestra, queen, mother, and widow in all but name, had not forgotten either. She had taken a lover in Agamemnon's absence. Aegisthus, a cousin with his own score to settle, descended from the cursed house of Atreus. Together they plotted murder beneath the roof Agamemnon had built. When the king returned, triumphant but weary, he walked into his palace as into a trap. Some say he was stabbed in the bath. Others, that Clytemnestra wrapped him in a robe and struck him down with an axe. Cassandra died too, screaming in a tongue none would hear, murdered at the threshold of a foreign land. Clytemnestra, bloodied and unrepentant, stood over her husband's body and claimed the act as justice. In that house, vengeance had become tradition. In time, vengeance came again. Orestes, son of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, returned from exile and slew both his mother and her lover, urged on by Apollo and hounded by the Furies, ancient goddesses who punished kinslaying with madness. His was a tale of blood and absolution, one that would echo in Athenian courts and myths for generations. But his was not the only path home, twisted by divine hands. Menelaus and Helen wandered long across the sea, driven southward to Egypt by contrary winds. Some versions say the Helen who went to Troy was only a phantom and the real woman had remained in Egypt the whole time, waiting, Uniged, while a war raged for her shadow. Others say she went willingly with Paris and that Menelaus forgave her, wearied by war and longing for peace. They returned to Sparta at last and ruled together in uneasy silence. But Helen's name, once a poem, had become a curse, and Sparta would never again rise as high as the day she left. And the Pythia kept breathing year after year, whispering riddles in the smoke, her voice the cold breath of a world that had already decided what was to come. To the ancient Greeks, death was not the end of the story, but merely the end of breath. What followed was not heaven or hell in the Christian sense, but a realm both more neutral and more ancient. A land beneath the earth where all the dead, great and small, noble and villainous, made their final journey. This place was Hades, named for the god who ruled it. And though it bore no flames, no pitchforks, no horned demons, it inspired a dread so deep that mortals seldom spoke the god's name aloud. They called him instead Pluton, the wealthy one, for all riches, all veins of silver and gold came from beneath the earth, and so, too, did the dead. The geography of the underworld was shaped not by logic, but by myth and memory. At its threshold ran the 5 rivers. Styx, the river of hatred and sacred oaths. Acheron, the river of sorrow. Phlegethon, of fire. Cocytus, of lamentation. And Lethe, of forgetfulness. Each marked a boundary not only physical, but spiritual. The dead arrived as shades. Psyche, breathless and bloodless, stripped of voice and form, and crossed into Hades with the help of Charon, the ferryman. For a coin, he would row them across Acheron. Those without proper burial, those who could not pay, were left to wander the shores for 100 years, whispering and weeping. But Olympus, in the north, stood higher still, its summit crowned in cloud and crowned in myth. The mountain was not merely a place, but a threshold, a place where sky met stone, where the mortal world ended and the divine began. It was here that Zeus, having claimed the heavens by fate and force, gathered the new pantheon of gods. The Olympian court did not mirror mortal kingdoms. There were no brick-paved roads leading to its gates, no heralds announcing guests, no armies stationed at its base. The gods needed no walls to guard them. The air itself served as their boundary, a veil too high for mortal breath. Olympus was said to have no storms, no snow, no decay. Its halls were of marble and cloud, its ceilings vaulted with starlight, and its corridors stretched wide enough for wind to wander freely. Here the gods walked not as shadows or omens, but in full form, radiant, terrible, and more alive than anything that walked the earth below. At the summit of Olympus stood Zeus, king of gods and men, seated upon a throne of thunder. He ruled not by brute strength alone, though his power was unmatched, but by the will of fate and the long memory of war. His voice carried like distant thunder. His eyes saw beyond clouds and time, and in his hand he carried the thunderbolt, the Cyclope's gift, the symbol of judgment, swift and final. He had slain a monster, saved a maiden, founded a line of kings, and carried the weight of fate with dignity. He would not live forever, but his name would, for from his blood would come Heracles, and from Heracles the next chapter in the story of the gods and men. Jason, broken and alone, returned to Iolcus. In his final days, he wandered amidst the ruins, forgotten and forsaken. One day, while resting beneath the decaying hull of the Argo, now dry-docked and rotting, a beam broke loose and struck his skull, killing him instantly. Thus passed the great hero, not in battle or glory, but in silence, beneath the bones of his past. Yet the tale of Jason endured, for within the quest for the Golden Fleece, in the gathering of heroes, in love turned sour and greatness undone, Greece discovered one of its most enduring myths, the promise and the profound price of ambition. Few bloodlines in Greek myth are as steeped in tragedy and misfortune as the royal house of Thebes, where most heroes battled monstrous beasts or sailed to claim distant thrones. The Theban kings found themselves battling their own kin and waging war against the ghosts of their past. Their legacy is not etched in bronze or celebrated in songs of triumph, but inscribed in riddles, madness, and murder. Even the very foundation of the city was steeped in ominous signs and unrest. Thebes began with a quest. Cadmus, a Phoenician prince and brother to Europa, embarked on a journey to find his sister after Zeus abducted her, disguising himself as a magnificent white bull. Unable to recover her, Cadmus sought guidance from the oracle at Delphi, who instructed him to abandon his search and instead follow a cow until it collapsed from exhaustion. There he was to found a city. Obedient to the oracle's words, he wandered until the beast collapsed upon a hilltop. However, when Cadmus sent his companions to fetch water, they met their doom at the hands of a serpent sacred to Ares, guarding a spring. Cadmus himself slew the serpent, and at Athena's command, sowed its teeth into the fertile soil. From the earth sprang forth armed warriors, the Spartoi or sown men, who immediately turned on one another in a frenzy of violence, until only 5 remained. But it was Odysseus whose journey became the most storied, the most sorrowful, the most enduring. After Troy, he sailed not for home, but into a 10-year trial by sea, caught between the wrath of Poseidon and the whims of fate. He was no innocent. Odysseus had contrived the wooden horse and led the sack of Troy, and in doing so had desecrated temples and angered gods. Poseidon in particular had marked him for punishment. Odysseus's ship was hurled from island to island, each more strange than the last. He blinded Polyphemus, the Cyclops, son of Poseidon, escaping with the clever name of Nobody. He dallied with Circe, the sorceress who turned his men into swine, and with Calypso, the sea nymph who kept him as a lover for 7 long years. He journeyed to the edge of the underworld, spoke with the dead, and heard the song of the sirens, tied to the mast while his crew rode with ears plugged by wax. He sailed between Scylla and Charybdis, lost all his men to storm and folly, and at last washed ashore, alone on the island of the Phaeacians, who, moved by his tale, gave him a ship and safe passage. At last, he returned to Ithaca in rags and silence, his beard long, his eyes cold. There, in his absence, suitors had overrun his house, feasting and plotting to marry his wife, Penelope, who had waited, weaving and unweaving the same shroud by candlelight. Odysseus, with the help of his son Telemachus, his loyal swineherd, and the bow only he could string, slew the suitors one by one. Blood filled the great hall. Peace returned, but only for a time. The cycle of war and vengeance was never far behind. Many others fared worse. Ajax the Lesser was struck down by Athena for his crimes. Diomedes, though valiant in war, returned to find his wife unfaithful, and his city turned against him. He wandered west, founding cities fading into legend. Philoctetes, who had slain Paris with Heracles' bow, found no welcome home and became a wanderer. These 5 became the founding families of Thebes, and Cadmus became their king. But the slaying of Ares' sacred serpent incurred the god's divine wrath. Cadmus was forced to serve the god of war for 8 long years as penance for his deed. He married Harmonia, daughter of Ares and Aphrodite, and even the gods themselves attended their wedding. The couple received a cursed necklace forged by Hephaestus, a beautiful adornment that would bring ruin to all who possessed it. And so, the doom of Thebes began not in hatred or malice, but in celebration, cursed by beauty and tainted by bloodshed. Generations passed. Cadmus' daughters would meet cruel and tragic fates. Ino was driven mad and threw her child into the sea. Autonoe's son, Actaeon, was torn apart by his own hunting hounds after accidentally glimpsing Artemis bathing naked in the woods. Semele, beloved by Zeus, was tricked by Hera into demanding that he reveal himself in his true divine form, and she was consumed by flames. And Agave, in a fit of Dionysian madness, tore her own son, Pentheus, limb from limb, believing him to be a mountain lion. But it was through Cadmus' great-great-grandson Laius that the true tragedy of Thebes would begin to unfold. Laius became king of Thebes and took Jocasta as his queen. But the gods had not forgotten the transgressions of the line of Cadmus. An oracle delivered a dire prophecy. Should Laius ever sire a son, that child would kill his father and marry his mother. As in all Greek stories, the warning was tragically insufficient to prevent the sin from occurring. Laius lay with Jocasta, and a son was born. Terrified by the prophecy, Laius ordered the infant's ankles pierced and bound together, then gave him to a servant with instructions to abandon him on Mount Cithaeron. But the servant, taking pity on the child, passed him on to a shepherd, who in turn delivered him to the king and queen of Corinth, Polybus and Merope, who were childless and welcomed the boy as their own. Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, was killed in Delphi, cut down at Apollo's altar, perhaps in penance for the blood he spilled at Troy. The Trojan War had promised glory. It had delivered only ashes. The heroes who had once stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the walls of Ilium returned to broken homes, bitter wives, hostile gods, and the hollow echo of songs that no longer matched the truth. In the end, there were no victors, only survivors. Before the walls of Troy ever stood, before heroes raised shields or ships touched the wine-dark sea, there was a deeper current of power, older than man, older even than war, the rule of the gods. Their stories are often whispered beneath the tales of mortals, but it was the Olympians who wove the very fabric of fate. And it was not always they who ruled. Before Olympus there was chaos, and after chaos came Gaia, Uranus, Cronus, and the slow, violent birth of divine order. The age of the Titans had ended with fire and thunder. Zeus, youngest of Cronus's children, had risen against his father, freed his siblings from the belly of the sky god, and cast the Titans into the black pit of Tartarus. In their place rose the Olympians, 12 in number, though their names and thrones shifted with time. Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Hestia, Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, and Hermes. They named him Oedipus, meaning swollen foot, and never revealed to him the truth of his birth. Oedipus grew into a clever and proud young man, but rumors of his illegitimate birth reached his ears. Seeking the truth, he journeyed to Delphi, where the oracle delivered the same terrifying prophecy once spoken to Laius, that he would kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, and believing Polybus and Merope to be his true parents, Oedipus fled Corinth, unwittingly running headlong toward his inescapable fate.